This is Trend Following Radio, where great thinking comes alive. Nobel Prize winners, legendary traders, best-selling authors, and the pros that know what drive us irrational human beings. I am your host, Michael Covel. Not filtered, raw, honest. That's my passion. A little bit of a blast from the past today. You kind of know my method of operation, my MO, so to speak. I like to give a good grouping of episodes, especially for people that are new to the show and for people that have been listening for years. Sometimes you forget that wisdom, and combining disparate voices to one show, one aggregated show, kind of works. First up, Joseph Pine, The Experience Economy. Read this book. That's all I got to say. Listen to his interview, which is about to follow, and read his book, The Experience Economy. Next up is Gregory Zuckerman, longtime reporter, and he happens to have a book out in the last couple years about famed investor Jim Simons. Jim Simons, the famed superstar who actually had a turtle trader inspiration or influence. Now, you may have heard this interview with Greg Zuckerman, but it's worth taking a listen again. And last but not least, Esther Wojcicki. Esther is the mom of some very famous daughters who happen to run some of the largest, or at least one runs the largest video sharing service in the world. And the others are pretty damn successful too. Esther has some great thoughts, some great ideas about raising kids, or frankly, just bringing anybody up to think in a good way. Without any further delay, let's jump right into Joseph Pine, Gregory Zuckerman, and Esther Wojcicki. My guest today is Joseph Pine. He is the author, along with his co-author, James Gilmore, of The Experience Economy. You might have seen this in the last 20 years. I first picked up this book in 1999, and the thinking that they put into their work has stayed with me the whole time. Look, time is limited. Attention is scarce. People are like goldfish basically now. The issue for all of us, are we engaging people? Are we real? Are we authentic? Are we just giving a commodity? Just giving a service? Or are we giving an experience, a transformation? That's what people want to pay for. People aspire to something transformative. That's all people want these days. They don't care if you can give them a commodity or a service. Everyone can do that. Anyone can do that. No. What it comes down to is the experience leading to the transformation. That's what people want. They want to get to the flow state. And the businesses, the entrepreneurs that can help them get there first, fastest, they're the ones that are going to make bloody fortunes. Without any further delay, let's jump right into my guest today, Joseph Pine, and talk about the experience economy. Going back in time, back to the .com era, I was buying every book under the sun. Honestly, though, there's probably only one or two, and only one, and not just because I'm talking to you, but only one that I can recall from that time period that stuck with me as kind of a really revolutionary type idea. And this was your book, The Experience Economy. And this was, I guess, your first article. I'm going to let you go down this path, but your article about it came out in 98. Was the book 99 originally, or?
Correct.
I'm one of the people that have got the original edition. It's stuck with me for all these years as an entrepreneur, as a business person. And it's not necessarily, as we're going to unpack today, it's not necessarily easy to do, but I think you've made the case for a long time. It's imperative that we do. Why don't you start from the beginning? What was the genesis? What was the nexus for my whole lead in on all this kind of stuff? Where did you start this first notion of those words, the experience economy?
I appreciate you having me on first, Michael, and I appreciate what you said about the book, that it's the one that has stuck with you over the past 20 years. That is quite high praise indeed, and I appreciate it. The genesis of it was actually in my first book, which was called Mass Customization. I actually wrote that when I was at IBM. It started as my thesis at MIT. Mass customization is basically efficiently serving customers uniquely, giving everybody exactly what they want, but doing it at a price they're willing to pay. I often said when I did speeches and workshops on mass customization that mass customizing a good, physical good, automatically turns it into a service. People would ask, well, how's that? Well, if you look at the classic economic distinctions, goods are standardized, services are customized. They're done just for a particular person. Goods are inventoried after production, but services are delivered on demand when the customer says this is what they want. And goods are tangible and services intangible, but part and parcel of mass customization is the intangible service of helping customers figure out what it is they want. That came out in late 92, and it was a little over a year later that I was doing an executive education class on mass customization. There's a guy in the back of the room, sort of a smart aleck, but he raised his hand and he asked the question, well, you talked about service companies that mass customize. What does mass customization turn a service into? And I shot back that mass customization automatically turns a service into an experience. And I went, whoa, that sounds good. Hold on a second. I got to write that down. I did write it down and I did study it, and I figured out that was in fact true. If you design a service that's so appropriate for a person, exactly the service that they need at this moment in time, then you can't help but turn into a memorable event, into an experience, because you're making them go, wow. That meant that experiences were in fact a distinct economic offering, as distinct from services as services are from goods. That meant we'd have an economy that would be based off of experiences after the agrarian economy on commodities, the industrial economy on goods, and the service economy, that the next thing we do is we'd enter into an experience economy. That was the genesis of it. Again, it was late 93, early 94 when that happened. That led into the Harvard Business Review article. We actually did write a couple of articles on it before that, including in the Wall Street Journal. We wrote an opinion piece on it. Then the book coming out in 1999, which we updated in 2011. And now, just this past week, we re-released in hardcover with a new preview.
So that 1994 time period was a very interesting time period. For me, I guess I would say probably I was in grad school in London. There really wasn't internet access, but I got back to the States May, June 94, and all of a sudden, Steve Case was giving us all a disk to put on our computers. And then within a year, Andreessen goes with Netscape in the summer of 95, and the game was on.
Michael, for some of your younger listeners, when they hear the terms that you're saying, I didn't have any internet access in London, it meant that the Wi-Fi was poor, that you couldn't.
Oh, there's no Wi-Fi.
No, it didn't exist, right? It didn't exist.
It's a good point because, I mean, you and I, and look, anybody in the late 30s, 40s, 50s, I mean, you're going to have a really still distinct idea of when things shifted. I do, however, now have a hard time remembering what it was like without these devices, but I do remember specifically 94, 95 is when it all changed. Now, how much was that change? Because you've already laid out that the experience economy notion was starting to come together in 92, 93, 94. How much did the tech explosion shift or hyperdrive you're thinking?
Not that much until after the book came out, actually. Still in the late 90s, it was still the fact that not every company had their own URL, that they really got it in that. I was always a tech guy. I actually used the ARPANET, the precursor to the internet, because my dad worked on it in Palo Alto in the late 60s and 70s. So I was a tech guy, but there was just so much going on in the real world and thinking about what we saw that it was before you really had that explosion. I mean, the smartphone hadn't been invented yet. That really was probably the demarcation point where there was such a difference in what was going on with digital technology, with the internet. I mean, yeah, from laptops and desktops, people were surfing the web. And that was the main reason that they did get on the web at the time, that they did have access to these, is that they had new experiences that they couldn't access in real life. That has gone forward many orders of magnitude in terms of what we can do today versus then.
Let me pick a classic example, or rather new classic example versus something a little more distant. I mean, it's current, but it goes back in time, Disney. But let's bring something really current that I think people can wrap their arms around. I want to just talk about it for a moment and unpack it as if we were a couple scientists observing this phenomena. And the phenomena that I want to observe that maybe we all don't really observe too closely because we just utilize it is the Apple Store. I mean, the Apple Store still to this day has got this feeling. I mean, I was in a new one in Singapore recently, and it was like a buzz. It's just freaking tablets and computers and phones. People are in there. You can feel the energy. It's like, what the heck is going on? What did Steve Jobs birth with this thing?
I was in the one in London. I'll be there early next month also, but the one I'm thinking of was in Paris earlier this year. That was that way too. It was just a buzz with things. People don't remember Steve Jobs actually announced the Apple stores in 2002. So I don't know if the first one is in 2002 or 3, but 16, 17 years old. It was before they invented the iPhone that they had the Apple stores. But he got lambasted in the business press that people said, you're a manufacturer. You can't go into retail. You're going to tick off your channel partners. They won't sell your product anymore. And you don't know anything about retail. You don't know how to talk to actual consumers. You're going to fail at this. And he proved them wrong because he didn't just design an Apple store, even though that's what it's named. He designed an Apple store experience, one where everything is live when you go in there. You get to try out products. You experience them before you buy them. I always say it's a basic principle of the experience economy that if you get your customers to experience your product before they buy it, the chances they will buy it go up. As a manufacturer, Apple became the number one retailer in the world in sales per square foot, obviously predicated on great product. A huge part of that buzz, a great majority of the buzz, is the products itself. But when you combine great products with a great experience, well, that's when magic can happen.
Now, if I contrast this with, I recall perhaps 3, 4, 5 years ago, spotting it for the first time, I walked by a Microsoft store. It's a graveyard. There's no buzz in there. There's like a bunch of just typical mall kids working their job. Whereas the typical mall kids working at Apple seem to have been given some kind of like dose of happy euphoria adrenaline or something. I mean, this whole experience thing is not just, it's got to be authentic. You got to believe it.
Exactly. The book my partner Jim Gilmore and I wrote after the experience economy was called Authenticity, What Consumers Really Want. Because we recognize that in a world of paid-for experiences, people increasingly question what is real and what is not. And increasingly, they want the real from the genuine, not the fake from some phony. We call authenticity basically the consumer sensibility of the experience economy, that people in the experience economy want their offerings, whether they're commodities, goods, services, and experiences, not just experiences, they want all offerings to be authentic to them. It's just sort of a natural evolution in what's going on. If you don't get that right, and Microsoft in particular, their stores basically are a one copy of Apple stores, rather than thinking about what's unique about Microsoft, what could we do that would really express who we are, what we're about, our heritage, and what our mission, what our purpose is in the world, then I think they would have come out with something else that had a much better chance of being successful.
Exactly. I just watched the Bill Gates documentary on Netflix. It was amazing. It was great. They did a fabulous job. Why can't I walk into a Microsoft store and feel Bill Gates? He is interesting. I mean, he's not as interesting as Jobs, but if it's done right, he's still a very interesting guy.
What I always think is the most iconic Apple store is the one on Fifth Avenue, New York. That's the glass cube. If you haven't been there, you've seen pictures of it. And somebody described it to us once as, because the store is actually subterranean. It's under the square, and it's open 24/7, 365. Somebody described it once as it's like walking into the mind of Steve Jobs. What would walking into the mind of Bill Gates be? And how do you instantiate that in a real physical place? What would that experience be?
Let me let you establish a few things before I take you off on too many tangents. I want you to go down the path of, well, first, let me just describe how I feel the experience economy is based on, frankly, going back to the original edition. What I took away from it was like, okay, here's a commodity, here's a service, here's the experience, whatever. But if I could create something for people that is an entirely unique experience they can only get from me, if I can imagine myself being, it's almost like being a Martin Scorsese. I mean, if I want to go see The Irishman, I've got to see Scorsese's Irishman. That's it. There's no other one. If I want to see Tarantino's new Hollywood film, I got to see that. There's no other one. And I think that's what I took away from it. It's like, wow, okay, if I can just imagine myself being there, and I'm going to paraphrase a little bit here. You can correct me if I'm wrong, but what I took away from it, what I remembered was That once you hit that, you can the charging and the pricing changes because people will pay for the experience. They'll pay for the transformation in ways that you, as the business owner, might not yet even understand how much they're willing to pay for that transformation.
Exactly. What we always say, it's in chapter 3 of the book at the very beginning, is you are what you charge for. You are what you charge for. If you charge for undifferentiated stuff, you're in the commodities business. If you charge for tangible things, you're in the goods business. If you charge for the activities your people perform, you're in the services business. But economically, you're in the experience business if and only if you charge for time, for the time your customers spend with you. And that means an admission fee or a membership fee. You wouldn't imagine going to a Scorsese film or a Tarantino film or any other film for that matter without paying an admission fee to get in, because you know it's an experience. Same with a theme park, with a sporting event, with a concert, with a play, and so forth. It was probably the most controversial thing that we said in the book is that in the future, retailers and restaurateurs and many others would charge explicitly for the experience. And that's one of the most gratifying things to see how much more of that has happened over the last 20 years, that still many people, like a Starbucks, gives away the experience to better sell the goods and services, and then they can charge a premium for it. But more and more companies are getting explicit, saying, you value the time, we're going to charge for the time. We're going to align what we charge for with what you value.
Let me let you now establish the kind of basic pyramid, so to speak, the commodities, goods, services to experience. Kind of explain that. Use something like just the basics, starting with the commodity of coffee, just the buying and selling. Map that out, people, so they have a feel for that pyramid.
To introduce the coffee example, back in April, the second week in April, there was an article in the Wall Street Journal on coffee commodity prices. Because coffee obviously is beans. You grow them on the ground, you extract them from the ground, you sell them on the open marketplace. And the headline of the article was that coffee costs less today than it did in April 1999, 20 years earlier. And the significance of that immediately hit for me was April 1999 was when the book came out, right? The official publication date, I believe, was April 5th, 1999. I could have the exact date wrong. That's exactly what it was talked to, and coffee was 99 cents per pound. Back in April, it was 93 cents per pound. Now, in between, what happened to it? It went down, it went up, it went way up to almost $2 a pound at one point, and then it came way back down again, because guess what? That's what happens to commodities. They go up, they go down. You're subject to the vagaries of the marketplace. But you take those commodities, you turn them into a physical good. Now you're like Maxwell House or Folgers or somebody, and you grind and roast those beans and you put them on a grocery store shelf. The beans, if you convert that $1 a pound price, is basically 2 or 3 cents per cup of coffee. What do you get for the physical goods? Well, if you buy it from a store and make it yourself, you're paying 5, 10, 15 cents per cup of coffee. But if you go to some place that brews the coffee for you, whether it's a vending machine, a kiosk, a corner diner, 7-Eleven somewhere, now you're paying 50 cents, $1.50 per cup of coffee. But surround the brewing of the coffee again with the ambiance and the theater of a Starbucks. And now how much you pay? $3, $4, $5 for a cup of coffee that only has 2 or 3 cents worth of beans in it. And that's where you can see that progression. What often happens as you're going up this is that goods and services are themselves being commoditized. Not true commodities, but they're treated like a commodity where people want to buy it just based off a price. And when that happens, guess what? Your price goes up, your price goes down. You don't have much control of it, but it's not going to go up for long. But that is the case with experiences that you can continue to charge more and more from because people value them much more highly than they do goods and services. In fact, people want goods and services to be commoditized. They want to buy them at the lowest possible price. They want to buy them at the cheapest possible convenience. Why? So they can spend their hard-earned money and their hard-earned time on the experiences that they value.
Let's keep it at Starbucks for a second. We can see that success, a few cents of beans to get the 3, 4, 5, who knows how many dollars, the pumpkin spice, vanilla, right. Who knows what, latte. But is that type of business that seems to have embraced the experience aspect of where you're going? Is there a ceiling? Meaning, does now other coffee places say, well, gosh, we need to do something similar to Starbucks and can't be the same. We've got to do our own thing. Or is Starbucks just kind of figured it out and for that particular business, there's not much more you can do with it? Or will they have to keep making the experience become something different because we get tired of the first experience?
Yes and no, and all of that. One, it's a ceiling in the sense that They've raised the bar of people and their expectations of coffee so that now even McDonald's, they can't charge as much as Starbucks, but they charge 2 or 3 times what they used to with their McCafes, where they're actually making drinks for you personally and so forth versus just filling a cup out of a big pot. And other cafes out there are able to do that and approach that. But it's also a floor in the sense of now that they are sort of ubiquitous, now people are used to it. It gives the opportunity for other companies to come in and say, we can do that a lot better. And we can become more cool than Starbucks because they're so ubiquitous. They can't really have the same coolness factor that they did when they were young. Now there's lots of companies that are selling coffee for $8, $10, $12. Blue Bottle, I'm thinking of in San Francisco and others. It's probably less than 5% of the cafe business, but it's absolutely out there. And then Starbucks itself sees that and says, okay, well, we got to do something at the high end. So they've come out their reserve roasteries, where you can also spend $10 or $12 per cup of coffee for other things. I've had an experience there with taking a client there where we had a flight of coffee. Taste different beans and from different locales and different roasting methods and so forth, and be able to taste the difference from them. And that's a whole experience that costs, it was like $20 or so per person for that. The sky's always the limit. There's always room for innovation. In Starbucks, one of the problems I think they're going to continue to have is, one, because they don't charge admission, they're sort of commoditizing themselves, one, with their loyalty card, where you can get it's not exactly 11th one free if you buy 10 now with their point system, but basically that's the principle. You buy a number of it, you get one free, which focuses people on the price. Well, you must then you've upped the price of it and not really paying for what I deserve because you're going to give me one free later, and then you got to include the price in that. And it gets them focused on that, which is bad. So is the drive-through, where you're not getting the full Starbucks experience. You're not getting there inside where they're shouting out the orders and they're making it where you've got place to spend your time reading, socializing, working, or getting a respite from your day, whatever it might be. And then the mobile ordering, where they're coming in and then they're leaving right away. You got all this confusion going on because of whose cup is that. And they call out a name for the cup and nobody picks it up, and that sounds bad. I think they've got a real problem there where they're starting to commoditize themselves because of all those factors.
Let me add some innovation, as you just threw the word out there, innovation to this thought process of extending the experience. One thing, or I guess it's more than one thing, a combination of two things that have really happened since the launch of the first edition would be the advent of social media and the advent of everybody is now a filmmaker with a phone in their hand. I'll share a story with you and I'll let you kind of run with it. The other day, I was in a 28th floor lobby in Saigon, Vietnam, brand new building, gorgeous, absolutely drop dead gorgeous. I was meeting with a Singaporean friend and it was like 2 or 3 in the afternoon. I guess this was, quote, high tea, but there was no one really there. It was kind of this new thing that the restaurant's doing. But there were 2 pairs, 2 women, 2 groups of 2 friends, and they each had ordered this high tea, which was a whole set of stuff that sat in the middle of the table, from little cakes to sandwiches to coffee, etc. All 4 of them, they were all dressed up to the nines. They were all taking pictures with the food. They wanted all of that with it. I don't even know if they ate the stuff. As you're talking about Starbucks, I'm thinking, how many people would probably be willing to pay extra now from Starbucks if you give me something that's beautiful that I can take a picture with?
You remind me, I had a friend in the Netherlands who says that when Starbucks first came there, that people would go in, order a cup of coffee, take their picture of it in the place, and then walk out, throw away the coffee, and go down the street. Didn't believe them, and I'm still not sure I know how prevalent it really is. But yeah, it is that sort of thing that people are doing. You have now, people are looking for Instagrammability, places where you can take pictures of things, put it on the internet, show what a great experience you're having, whether it's the Museum of Ice Cream or the Rosé Mansion or the Color Factory, or there's now like a score of these out there that are charging often $25, $30, $40 admission fee to the place that is mostly to take your picture in there. That's how far we've gone.
I think it's amazing too that in Kyoto, Japan, you can go look at these temples. There's people everywhere, but give the Japanese credit. You can almost stand anywhere and get pictures of the temples with nobody in your sight lines except the temple. I don't know how the Japanese did it. It's absolutely amazing. They did this hundreds of years ago, probably when they first set it all up. But it is true. This now, it seems like the experience that everybody wants to be in film. Everyone wants to be a star. Everyone wants to be associated with something memorable. And memorable is a huge part of your work.
One of the fundamental characteristics of experiences is that are memorable. We talked about goods being tangible, services intangible, well, experiences are memorable. There's a line of memorability between services and experiences. You got to cross that line. You got to just do something that so engages people. It's probably the key word, is that you engage people in the experience you stage in order to create that memory within them. Because experiences also happen inside of us. They're inherently personal because the experience really is the reaction that we have to the events that are staged outside of us. Becoming memorable is a very key thing when you're staging an experience.
When you first were thinking about that, okay, let's stage the experience. We want something to be memorable. Were you thinking at the moment in time, because at that time, not everybody had a camera on their possession. So the definition, the understanding of memorable has changed, because I think we're kind of using our photos and our Instagram, etc., as part of our offline mind.
Yeah, it's interesting. I wrote a blog post last year that made the point that I started seeing more and more that people were using the word memory when they actually meant a photograph. They're saying, capture your memory here. And really they mean take a picture. And I saw it both consumers doing it and companies doing it, which is quite interesting that it's become so intertwined that if you have a great experience, you have to take pictures of it. And there's actually, in the academic literature, there's a debate going on about whether that enhances the experience or detracts from the experience. I always viewed it initially as a distraction, that you don't want people getting at their phone because it takes them out of the experience. Now the experience is being mediated by this tiny little screen instead of being experienced live as a whole person. And I still think largely that's the case in a lot of experiences. You've seen the pictures. There's an article in today's New York Times about the Louvre and the Mona Lisa. You see these pictures of hundreds of people in the room and they're all holding up their cameras. They're not experiencing the actual thing with their eyeballs, unmediated. But then again, there is also research that says that if you are thoughtful about it, that it actually can cement the memories more. It can enhance the experience if you think about how you are framing it, how you are capturing the right thing, rather than just sort of willy-nilly taking pictures. It can be either or, depending on the person, the circumstances, the time, the experience, and so forth.
You and I are both old enough to know that we've got family pictures that were not taken all the time. So there's a few family pictures.
Special.
Right. They're special and they're etched into our mind because there was not that many of them. And those become the definition of our childhood in some ways. But today I've got teenage nephews, niece. I mean, the pictures are their memories. They're taking so many pictures from a volume perspective. How could those pictures, how could those experiences possibly be memories? There's too many things going on. It's like we're trying to categorize every aspect of our life. It's the Truman Show, okay? We're trying to be the Truman Show.
Very much so. We're the director, however, and the star, not just the star of the Truman Show. Another book, I think from the early 2000s, I don't know if you read, Neil Gabler wrote a very interesting book called Life the Movie. He was making that case before people were all carrying around cameras with them all the time, and that people were trying to rearrange their lives as if they're in a movie and they're directing their own movie. And I think that thesis is even more true today than it was then. Now, I was in, since you've been dropping all these place names, right, I got to get one in myself. A month ago, I was in Moscow, and I was doing a speech there in the experience economy. Also there on the stage with me was Dr. Daniel Kahneman, right, the Nobel Prize winner. A psychologist, but he won on economics.
A past guest on this show.
Oh, well, super. Right. So then you know him. And they gave me the honor, I think because I was a native English speaker, to interview him on stage, which was quite an honor. It was wonderful. One of his big concepts is the experiencing self and the remembering self. As you're saying, is that people are taking all these pictures so much for that remembering self to be able to look through them, but are they really getting the full impact since there's so many of them that they have that they can only devote a few seconds or even microseconds to, versus the ones that are special that you really spend time and think about, which really maybe take you more back to that experience. You need to design your experiences for the experiencing self, and the remembering self is one of the things that he said. But I wonder, do we ourselves as the experiencer spend enough time thinking about designing how we undergo an experience for our experiencing self as well as for our remembering self?
Let me see if I can get this name right. I've had to use it recently on the podcast with another guest.
Mihai
Csikszentmihalyi. There we go.
I knew what you said. Once you said you got to get it right. That's who it is. Mihai
Csikszentmihalyi. There we go. I think I've got it. I think I beat you.
All right.
Why don't I let you go down the path of outlining his thought process? Because what we're trying to do here, and the reason that if you can get to the experience economy, if you can get to this transformation point as a business owner and what the individual end user is chasing, is we're all chasing this kind of flow state. This is what we want. This is the purpose. Why don't you speak to that and kind of give people a big overview and fill in some blanks there?
Yeah, well, Csikszentmihalyi, he's a Hungarian psychologist also, and he talks about optimal experiences. And the optimal experiences are those that get you into a state of flow. What flow is where you're balanced between your skills and your challenges. That if your skills are so much higher than your challenges, you get bored. If your skills are so much lower than your challenges, then you get anxious. But if you get that precise balance there where it's just melding together, is when you get in the state of flow, which is where you're so engrossed in an experience that everything else washes away, all sense of time goes away. You could be spending 2, 3, 4 hours at something and think only 30, 40 minutes went by, because you are so engrossed. And those are sort of few and far between, but if you can get people into that state of flow, it is one of the highest value things that you can do. And you can see it all. You obviously can see it in things like video games and that, but surgeons get into state of flow when they're doing surgery, ballet dancers doing ballet. Even I think so, even when I'm writing, there's times when I'm writing and everything's just coming out. You don't want interruptions. You just want to go through that and let it flow out of you in that sense. We relate it to chapter 2 of the book. We have a model called the 4 E's, because basically it's the 4 realms of experience. I won't go into the details of the model, but there are 4 realms of experience, 4 types or genres of experience of entertainment, educational, escapist, and aesthetic. We do think that we always give the advice of the most robust experiences that are those that hits the sweet spot in the middle, that have aspects of all 4 of these. And that we think is often where you get that state of flow, where I will go in the model a little bit, where it's both passive and immersive. Well, it's both absorbing what's going on around you and immersing yourself in that environment. That then I think are some of the conditions that can create that flow experience.
And on the other side of the flow experience, to go through it, then you're left with a transformation. That's the point. If you could get people to understand that you're going to deliver, or at least give them the opportunity to possibly get into that flow state, if you can assist them for whatever you're delivering and get them through that, get them into that mix, and then possibly get them on the other side at a transformation, that is a business owner just, I mean, gosh, how can you not do well economically if you can pull that off?
We even talk about that. We're often asked, well, what's after experiences? Well, we use the same heuristic, which what happens when you customize an experience? What happens when you design an experience that's so appropriate for a particular person? Exactly the experience that they need at this moment in time. And that's where you then create a life transforming experience. Exactly what you're talking about. You get through the other end of that flow and you've been transformed in some way. For most people, often it's not one life transforming experience. It's often a series of experiences that you have. But transformations are, in fact, the 5th and final economic offering in this progression of economic value that we highlight in the Experience Economy book, where you are using experiences as the raw material to guide people to change, to help them in particular to achieve their aspirations. There is no more economic value you can provide than to help somebody achieve his aspirations.
By the way, as a little bit of a side tangent, I'm holding the new edition in my hands right now.
Oh, you've got it already. Super.
I'm holding it in my hands. I did notice something, though, from past memory, because when I was looking at the cover, I was thinking, well, I knew it was a different design, but I was thinking, well, there's something else that's different here. And I had to go back, and the subtitle has changed.
Right.
What's the backstory there? So the original subtitle, Work is Theater and Every Business is a Stage, which is still pretty damn cool.
Oh, yeah. And we still have 3 chapters on theater in there. It is basically a recognition that when you are staging an experience, your work is theater, that you're on stage whenever you're in front of customers. We wanted to make that clear and did that. And so it's still in there. But one of the key things we've realized over time, no pun intended, is that time really is the currency of experiences. What people value is the time. The main difference between a service and experience is services are about time well saved, nice, easy, convenient, and experiences are about time well spent, that people value the time that they spend with you. In order to get them to spend that time with you, that's where you have to capture their attention. And all the models we have in there, the 4E model is about having a robust experience that really capture people's attention. The theming model is about having a cohesive experience. The customization is an integral part of the book about creating that personal experience within each person. The dramatic experience that comes with theater, and even a transformative experience that is possible to do with one or more experiences. All of those are based on them, people giving you their attention. And then, of course, money is that recognition of the value that you are creating, that you are what you charge for, that you need to charge for time. And with transformations, we actually say you need to charge for outcomes. That all that matters is whether the customer actually achieves his aspiration. Inputs don't matter, only outcomes. So you ought to be charging for the outcome, where you're providing time well invested. Another thing we talk about in that new preview is that transformations are time well invested. I'm investing my time, and you're helping me do that in a way that's going to pay dividends down the road through this new person I am, through this new transformation. In today's experience economy, basically every company is competing against every other company in the world for the time, attention, and money of individual customers.
As you use the word aspiration, I'm thinking there's the aspiration that people have that they want. Then there's possibly the aspiration that they don't even know they want yet.
Right. It's the same with goods. Steve Jobs and Apple created goods that you didn't know you wanted. Henry Ford famously said, if I asked people what they wanted, they would have said a faster horse. But you are able to think on behalf of your customers and come up with things that they can absolutely need. And once they know about it, they absolutely want it, even though it had never occurred to them. That's innovation.
In prepping for this conversation, I started running around the internet and seeing what was being said, and mostly all kinds of good stuff. I think on the Wikipedia page, though, they had some...
I tried to stay off of that.
They had some criticism. I started to read it. I didn't really even understand it. Whatever it was kind of boring me to tears. But I mean, honestly, because I already had my own preconceived idea of what this is, and I already am on the same page with you. But what is the community or the people out there? Is there really somebody out there that opens up the experience economy, goes through it, and then when they're finished, some high-level academic says, I'm going to spend my life's mission to prove this wrong? Is there really a legitimate criticism that exists?
Boy, I sure hope not. There are some criticisms, some valid, some less so, but...
What's the valid criticism from your perspective?
Valid one is that we take the business company view. And that's absolutely true, that we don't take the consumer view. We are talking to business people about this is what you need to do to create greater economic value. We don't spend a lot of time talking about the consumer view of experiences in the book. We do on the stage a lot. We do in conversations like this where we talk about how consumers are experiencing things through their phones and whatnot. We then wrote a book on authenticity, which again, we're still writing to businesses, but we say, but you got to understand authenticity is personally determined because people get to decide for themselves what is authentic to themselves. We think we do a lot of that, but it is valid that we do take a producer view as opposed to the consumer view of what's going on. That's one valid one.
There was an interesting debate recently started by Martin Scorsese, and he was lamenting that indie films, his style of films, perhaps some of the directors that came out of the 70s, a lot of the great ones, obviously, that now they're being replaced by massive corporate superhero films, the Marvel stuff. Scorsese was making a decent case, but then I start thinking about it from the experience perspective, and it's like, okay, yeah, it's big corporate America, and they're delivering something that's putting the fannies in the seats, and it's making billions and billions of dollars. But
giving the people what they want.
I was going to say, they're delivering an experience. It's letting people that want to imagine maybe they're a part of these superhero movies. I mean, it's not my thing. I've seen a few of them, but obviously people like it. So I mean, it's kind of an interesting criticism from Scorsese because I can see his perspective. But then on the flip side, it's like, well, hold on. They're delivering what people want.
Certainly what you don't want to have happen is for them to so deliver what the masses want that they do lose out on the ability to do other things, to lead people into stories that they may not know they want, but they would greatly value if they saw. And that's what Scorsese is doing. I don't think it's a real danger, but people talk about sort of the crowding out effect of superhero movies, that it certainly has crowded out some, but not so much, particularly with the rise of Netflix and Amazon Prime and now Hulu and Disney streaming and Apple streaming and that. There's so much originality going on that have nothing to do with superheroes that I think that it's not a valid worry anymore. but you certainly want to give the Scorseses room to do their thing, tell their stories in a way that will, in fact, wow people who see them.
Interesting thought about the Netflix. I'm a recent subscriber. I just had to check it out, see what's going on. I would have to say that for me, it seems like the vast majority of Netflix content, while it's, quote, new and original, the most interesting aspect seems to be the graphic that advertises what it is, because generally I've clicked through some of these things and a lot of the content, they're spending money on things, they're producing it, but it's going to be interesting to see as people move farther along down the time scale, are they really getting those transformation experiences, or are they just getting kind of filled up for the day? There's a lot of people that are kind of like making things look flashy and dashy, but is it really got heart and soul to it and the authenticity?
Right. Imagine if Netflix's algorithm, hadn't thought about this before, but if Netflix's algorithm took into account what was going on in your life. Your wife was just diagnosed with breast cancer. How does that affect what you ought to be watching? Or if your kids just graduated from college and left the house, even simply you got a new job and you have new responsibilities. Well, how should that affect what I'm watching and so forth? I think eventually that sort of day may come as well, that it's not just about my mood or what I've liked in the past. It's like, what's going on in my life? What's going to be the things that'll help me through this period that I'm in?
Is there something beyond transformation?
I don't think so. We've asked ourselves that question. We've come out to the end of no, because one, you've got this parallel here. It's a commoditization, customization. Experiences can be commoditized because the second time you have an experience, it may not be as good as the first and so forth. But we always say with transformations that the customer is the product, that all that matters is, does the customer get their aspiration again? So the customer is the product, not what you do for that customer, whether they achieve their aspiration. And you cannot commoditize human beings. Human beings are inherently unique and cannot be commoditized. It's why we always rebel against things like selling body parts and organs and stuff, because they're so wrapped up in the uniqueness of and inherent dignity of every human being. Then we looked at, well, what happens if you customize the transformation? If you design a transformation that's so perfect for somebody, what could you do? And the only thing we could think of would be actually perfecting people that wouldn't just move them to another aspiration. And once you talk about perfecting people, you're no longer talking about the economies of humankind. You're talking about only things that God can do.
Is there another example that you might want to run with that kind of takes a lot of what we've been talking about in this conversation and kind of exemplifies? We've brought up the Apple Store, we've brought up Starbucks, other odds and ends. Is there another one beyond Disney that you really can paint with? I mean, we could go with Disney, it's fine with me, but is there something you'd like to paint with that would really kind of tie everything we've been talking about together?
Well, the other key example I always talk about, and this can differ by cultures, not a single company, but you see what's going on with the progression of economic value, is the birthday party. The core of a birthday party is the experience of bringing out a birthday cake with the candles lit and blowing out the candles and sharing that birthday cake and then opening up presents in that. When you and I were growing up, it was sort of standard for usually our moms to bake a birthday cake, and they bake it from scratch, which means they actually get out the commodities. They touch the flour and the sugar and the cocoa. Actually, I have no idea what goes into a cake. I've never baked one. But they get all that stuff, and it costs only 20, 30, 40 cents at commodities level. But along came manufacturers like Betty Crocker and Duncan Hines, and they created cake mixes and canned frostings, and now we can bake a birthday cake for $2 or $3. But as moms everywhere became more time starved and parents, they went back to work and so forth, we don't always have the time to do that, that you call up the corner bakery or the grocery store and ask them to perform the service of baking the cake. And that would often cost $10, $20, $30. So you got an order of magnitude from 20, 30 cents to $2 or $3 to $20, $30. And then we stopped even not just baking the cake, we stopped throwing the party. We outsource it, and we go to some place like Chuck E. Cheese's or a McDonald's land or a museum or a Build-A-Bear or any of these innumerable places that will stage the birthday party experience for our kids. Now we're often spending hundreds of dollars on that birthday party experience, another order of magnitude of value. What about the transformation level? Well, in fact, there are companies that actually do things, not necessarily some kids' favorite birthday parties, but do things where kids actually learn things as part of it. Do games around math or history or things like that, where it's not just a matter of enjoying the experience and being entertained, but in fact, educationally learning as well. And that could be part of a transformation. The place where you see that, since you obviously love movies like I love movies, I don't know if you remember, I think it was the 1997 movie with Michael Douglas and Sean Penn called The Game. So basically, Michael Douglas is this billionaire type, made a lot of money on Wall Street, but and I won't ruin the whole story, but he has this particular incident in his childhood that has left him emotionally stunted. And he's not really a full person in that way. His brother, played by Sean Penn, is much more wild and open and that sort of thing, that he wasn't affected in the same way. He gives, for his birthday, he gives his brother, played by Michael Douglas, a card that says, go to this company and this is my birthday present for you. And the company was called CRS, which stood for Consumer Recreation Services, but it was actually a transformation company, because when he got there, they analyzed him, they diagnosed him, they ran him through a treadmill, they saw what his capabilities are, they had a psychologist, did all his Rorschach tests, they figured out what he needed. And Michael Douglas, in the end, sort of said, nah, I don't want to go through it. I said, I don't care what it is. They said, okay. But nonetheless, the game starts. And it plunges him into all these different scenarios. Again, I won't go through them, but at the end of which allows him finally to get over this childhood trauma that he had. And it was a birthday party transformation that literally cost millions, if you think about what it costs to be able to do this. So I do recommend it to you. I did see it. I hadn't seen it in such a long time. I found it on an airplane 3 or 4 years ago. So I watched it again. I would say it still holds up.
I will definitely check it out.
All right.
One last thought. I want to take you back to something. We were mentioning the Apple Store. We talked about the Microsoft Store. We talked about Microsoft essentially just kind of like a bad facsimile, not a copy. That's got to be a little daunting. I'm thinking about that from the business owner's perspective. So here you have Microsoft with unlimited capital. They can do whatever the hell they want to do. They see their competitor do this exciting thing. How does a business avoid, because I would just think that the mistake Microsoft made was they were in Seattle, they were in their own offices, they saw Apple had these stores, and they never really truly understood what Apple was doing, which is an amazing thing to say because, again, they have unlimited capital, so how could they not possibly understand what Apple was doing? But if I'm just looking at their stores, they didn't understand. They didn't get it at all. How can companies start to navigate, big picture-wise, making the same mistake that Microsoft made? You might even want to outline some of the mistakes they made. I don't know if they've ever talked about this, how they screwed that up so bad.
Well, like you said, it really was just a copy. They thought the secret was in white walls and wood tables, as opposed to understanding how you interacted with people and the products that you had. Part of it is that they didn't have the same level of engaging products that Apple had. But it does get back again, and this is points that we make in authenticity about understand your heritage, understand who you are, understand your sense of purpose. What makes you you as a company? What is your purpose in the world beyond making a buck? Everything has to flow from that and has to be a fulfillment of that purpose. So then what is the physical instantiation in retail of who you are as a company that exposes people not just to your products, but to your raison d'etre, to your purpose, to who you are, that exemplifies all that. And that's when I think you can create something. The store that comes to mind, I think it's the best retail format in at least the last 15 years after Apple, probably number 2 in the world versus Apple in terms of just great retail experience, is Eataly. Have you, in your travels, been to an Eataly?
I think I have. I don't know if I've bought anything from them.
One is when I first heard the name, I thought, well, this is an American company. But in fact, no, it actually is an Italian company that named itself Eataly, Eataly, and it's everything about Italian food. They have the commodities there that you make food from. They have the goods, the pasta and so forth. They have appliances and that. They have the services, merchandising, all of that, as well as experiences of cafes, of restaurants, and even a transformative cooking school that they charge admission for to turn you into an Italian chef. All comes together wonderfully. You talk about buzz, the amount of people moving in and through that place and sitting down and enjoying themselves as this entire amalgamation of experiences, I think just a wonderful, wonderful thing. That is their purpose, is they've made that physical instantiation of who they are as a company, almost as a country. I think of it as the best tourism possible for Italy as well.
A great topical example of an experience appears to be eating a Popeye's fried chicken sandwich. Apparently, it's not just the chicken sandwich that people are chasing. They are chasing the possible fight, the possible shootout, the possible car wreck, the possible body slam, all of this excitement. And I'm not even joking. Look, it's just a damn chicken sandwich, okay? I've not had one. I can't imagine it's that amazing that all of a sudden all national media has given Popeye all this amazing free publicity. But it must be something to where America's a little bit, I don't know, just it reached America at a boring time, is bored. All of a sudden, all this excitement is going on Popeyes where people are literally getting killed. And then more and more people want to go get the sandwich because that seems exciting.
It's worth killing over. I don't know. Yeah. And well, it's not like Popeyes is a new company. It's been around for decades, right?
Right. How do they all of a sudden create a chicken sandwich experience that you must literally get up out of your chair and run to the Popeyes? Right? It's amazing, huh? It's a really fun topic, though. I appreciate you coming on today and sharing with me. The experience economy competing for customer time, attention, and money. New preface. All kinds of new stuff going on in there. I appreciate you coming on. When's the next book? I know there's going to be another one. There's always another book.
Well, I'm working on a few things, bringing mass customization up, thinking about what that means in today's time, which basically flows from the fact that there are no markets, there are only customers. Therefore, we have to stop marketing and start customering. That's something I'm working on. And then another 5-10 years, I want to start over from scratch on the experience economy. Not even look at the old book, just say, this is what I think about it today. This is what it needs to be. And this is how we talk about it and so forth. So I'm looking forward to that opportunity. Then I can head off into the sunset.
We'll probably be wearing helmets of some sort with some kind of experience that's completely, maybe by that time, everything we've talked about and written about will be completely go off the rails and we'll be in crazy land or something. I don't know.
I did write a book on that, by the way.
Really?
A number of years ago called Infinite Possibility, Creating Customer Value on the Digital Frontier. So I did address that possibility.
Cool stuff. Hey, where can we send people? Where's the best website? Amazon for the books. Where's the best website?
Yeah, best website, www.strategichorizons.com. Strategic Horizons with an S. That's the name of our company. Jim Gilmore and I and our managing partner, Doug Parker, who does everything else that we don't do as we go gallivanting around the world talking about this.
Joe, thank you for taking the time today. I hope you enjoyed it.
Thanks, Michael. I loved it.
Next up, Gregory Zuckerman. Quite lucky today to have a really interesting guest, the author of the new international bestseller, the man who solved the market, how Jim Simons launched the quant revolution. My guest today, Gregory Zuckerman, longtime Wall Street Journal reporter, decades at it, quite the investigative guy, knows how to get behind the scenes and tell a great story. So Jim Simons, I think Greg has put to bed any thought that there might be a better trader in the history of the planet than Simons. The guy just mints money at his company, Renaissance Technologies. The book is great. I highly recommend it. Today, I take Greg across Mr. Simons' world and try to get to some of those insights that we can all use, we can all learn from, perhaps. You know, this is one of the smartest guys ever. I mean, just a brilliant mathematician. I mean, that was before he even got to investing. Then he got to investing, and he's dominated like that, like none other. Without any further delay, without any further rambling from me, let's jump right into my interview with Gregory Zuckerman. Listen, back in the day, I think somewhere, and I'm not asking you to recollect, but I think we might have exchanged emails 15 years ago or something, because I think you're a guy that has been in kind of this following these outsider quant traders for a long time. And you know all the names, you know all the players.
I do. I've been following this for a long time. I'm focused very much on the buy side, be it hedge funds, once in a while, Bill Gross, and mutual funds if something interesting, or Jeff Gundlach. But yeah, I'm very buy-side oriented. When quant trading is interesting, I'll focus on that. When long short stuff is blowing up, then I'll move to that. But I'm a buy-side guy, so yeah, we could have.
Here's where I want to jump in with you, because I think, at least for me, for someone who's written quant books and looked at performance tables, I immediately, in your book, and hopefully I'll be the first person to start with this lovely topic on all the interviews that you're going to be doing. Oh, by the way, congratulations, book in the top 50 of all books for sale on Amazon at this moment. So that's pretty damn cool.
Yeah, so far the reaction's been really strong. A little bit surprising, frankly, but it's been great.
So I'm on page 331 and 332, and there's a performance table on there that I've never seen before. That might not mean anything, but I know a few people here and there, and no one's ever shared it with me. And I would love for you to tell me about that performance table. Was it just something that came along in the natural process? Had you seen it earlier? Because that's a really interesting table. Management fee, performance fee, return, before fees, size of the fund, medallion, trading profits. It's an amazing 2 pages.
Yeah, like much in the book, it looks like it came together easily and quickly, but it was a lot of late nights and frustrated days.
Who did you cajole for those 2 pages?
It was many people. It was cobbling together information, data, annual reports, early annual reports. Some of it was official stuff that they used to share with investors when they had outside investors. That was the easier, I mean, not easy, but it was easier to get that kind of information. Early on, they had some outside LPs. If you track down some of the old timers that are still around, and that was another challenge of the book, that not everyone who's in the know is really around anymore. Even during the course of my reporting, some passed away. We're talking the 70s and 80s are important periods of Jim Simon's life. The earlier periods of Medallion's history, there were some people alive who still had some annual reports. Then you have to encourage them, cajole them to share them with you. Some were more eager to share than others. The more recent stuff, I had to develop sources within the firm. That was even harder. This is the hardest project I ever did in my life, hardest piece of work I ever did in my life. I'm glad to put it all together because, like you said, I had never seen it all on 1 page or 2 pages, as it were. I wanted to see it myself.
Let me take you to the question that then really starts to intrigue me. In my world, looking at a lot of these, quote, trend following guys, I've always found the month by month tables fascinating. You can see so much. For example, if you look at October of 08, you see all this trend following performance that was straight up. That's so interesting. Did you have a chance to see the month by month?
I saw some of the month by months, not enough to include in the book, not for the entirety of it. I did get people on the inside and outside who invest or invested in Medallion who described the month by month. And like you said, when I talk to people about the performance, almost everybody focuses on the returns, 66% a year, 39% after fees. They are remarkable, but internally, and to sophisticated investors like yourself, just as impressive, or maybe even more so, is the Sharpe ratio, which they've gotten up to 7.5 at this point, and the fact that monthly returns are pretty steady, almost always. They've had a few down months, they have, but not many. And that's as impressive as the outright returns, the numbers.
Is there anything else like this? I mean, behind the scenes, is there some Jim Simons that's even more publicity shy than Jim Simons?
I don't think so. I think there are some that are even more secretive. There's a group out in Princeton that reportedly has amazing returns. I don't think they're as good as Medallion. I don't think they're as big as Medallion. Medallion at this point is $10 billion in size, and they leverage that up, obviously. It's not just the returns, not just the Sharpe ratio, but the size at this point is pretty substantial. Earlier on, they capped it at smaller numbers, 5 billion, and then even earlier periods much lower. They give back all the profits each year, and they start over again with about $10 billion. There are others who've had ridiculous returns, but they're generally smaller. I haven't been able to substantiate anything like this. There could be something somewhat similar. I hear rumors about smaller groups, and yet still substantial, but not as big as Medallion.
You know what's really interesting here, too, staying on these 2 pages of performance and size of fund, is even though 10 billion is substantial, these days, when you look at groups like Bridgewater, AQR, I mean, this 10 billion looks small. So clearly, just philosophically from the top, they're running a very different shop in the sense that they obviously don't want to have 200 billion under management.
Yes, they've made a conscious decision, and I write about it in the book. It really contrasts with others, like you said, with Bridgewater, with AQR. AQR is a quant shop, and the returns been good over the years, nothing remarkable. People criticize them a lot as being a marketing shop more than a performance shop. Probably a little overdone, that criticism, but they are a monster in terms of AUM. You can make it a broader statement. So I wrote an earlier book called The Greatest Trade Ever about John Paulson and those who anticipated the financial meltdown and did really well. And Paulson made $20 billion over 2 years, but then he made that same classic mistake by getting too big. His AUM, I think, got up to 30, maybe even $40 billion. And then the resulting period was really poor. He's underperformed. Jim Simons and Medallion made a decision. They'd rather have performance than AUM. They'd rather focus on the incentive fee than the management fee. They could be managing a lot more. Now they have some outside funds. So they overall do manage about $68 billion. But the key fund is the Medallion Fund, and they won't let people in. And they've actually offended early investors, even people close to Jim, friends and others, who once were investors in Medallion and were pushed out. They made a conscious decision. We want performance to be strong. We don't think we can do it above a certain level. Today, it's $10 billion. We're going to kick people out, and we don't even care about the management fees.
I'm going to take you back in time in a few minutes to get at the nexus of the book, your starting point. But I want to stay here for a second because as we talk about this great performance, the obvious follow-up question that everyone wants to know, and since you are the author of this fine international bestseller right now, everyone wants to know, Greg, what does Jim do to make all this money?
Jim Simons developed a different way to invest or trade or speculate, however one puts it. There are always those who were doing technical analysis. This is a cousin of that, but it's on a much, much more sophisticated level. There were always people using traditional methods, such as the Peter Lynch approach. Know what you invest in. Your wife comes home with a nice pair of pantyhose. Hey, honey, those are new. Where did you buy them? I'm going to buy Legs, the company. And he made a lot of money. There were always those like George Soros and Stanley Druckenmiller sitting back, looking at global trends, economic outlook, estimated interest rates, et cetera, make big bets. Jim Simons was the pioneer, not the only one, he was a pioneer in a very different approach. That's using mathematics, developing predictive algorithms. This is way, way, way before Mark Zuckerberg and Silicon Valley embraced that approach, and developing an automated trading system. Early on, they couldn't put on the trades within their system, but their automated system told them what to buy and what to sell. It's all about looking for patterns and looking for short-term patterns.
What's the definition of short-term? Are we talking light speed, a day, or is it all kinds of short-term time periods?
From my reporting, I've determined that the average holding period is about 2 days. Some people confuse them with high-frequency fast traders. They're not that. They've tried that. They haven't really succeeded with that. They kind of don't think that's their niche. That's not their focus. They don't get in and get out in a millisecond ahead of you and I. They try to look for short-term patterns, be it moments to months, is the way they describe it. It could be a few days, it could be a few hours, but it's not a second or under a second. They're not about building their computers to that point. And frankly, they've got very, very powerful software and technology and computers, needless to say, hardware, but it's not as powerful as some others. And they kind of poke fun at themselves to some extent. It's short-term patterns that you and I aren't aware of, and they repeat, and their thesis is that human behavior repeats, and they take advantage of that. They do the best in periods of panic because human behavior seems to repeat itself in those periods.
They trade everything. They started with futures and went to stocks, but in terms of markets, they're going to go from stocks, bonds, commodities, you name it, metals, ags, everything under the sun is going to be in their portfolio.
That's exactly true. So until about 1994, they were only making money in commodities, in currencies, and in bond futures. And they were about $800 million of size at the time. People internally said, hey, we're doing fine, Jim. Let's keep it going. No reason to try to expand into equities, which really was the area that was frustrating them. They could not figure out stocks. And there were a lot of frustrations along the way in the whole Jim Simons Renaissance story, which is kind of one of the surprises that I found. Jim said, no, I want to be bigger than $800 million of assets. I want to change the world kind of thing. I want to be the one to figure it out. And there was some disagreement within the firm about that. Jim is a guy, he's a fascinating guy because he's a mathematician. He can talk about that. He's a quant. He's an academic, but he's also a guy who loves money. He's not ashamed of that. And he wanted to get really wealthy. And the only way to do that is do it in equities because it's just a deeper market. You don't run up into ceilings and limits with things like soybeans and some small currencies. And that's what they were trading at the time. They finally figured out how to make money in equities and they were off to the races. But if they hadn't, they really would have been another nice, successful hedge fund, but a narrow one.
Before I take you back to the start here, I want to take you back to the start of Jim. I can recall probably in the mid-1990s seeing these old Financial World magazines. They weren't old then, but current then. And you could see the top 100 players on Wall Street. And he started to sneak into these lists. There wasn't any other information on him, especially when the internet started to kick in. You couldn't find anything. Roll forward about a decade, sometime around 2005. I'm in an office with a fund manager who today has a net worth exceeding $1 billion. And we were talking about these kinds of topics. And he looked at me and he said, "What about Jim Simons? What does he do?" And I'm like, how the hell do I know? You're the one that's made the bloody fortune. So it's really interesting where you're going today. I can see why, if so many preeminent competitors have been curious about him, and then that trickles down to the Twitter world. I mean, all of a sudden you've got the entire world like really curious. What's the backstory? Let's take it to the backstory because Jim is a guy, I want you to start this. I'm going to kind of give you a lead in, but I mean, he's basically famous for math formulas that most of us mere mortals can't begin to comprehend or understand. That's before he ever got into trading.
That's exactly right. And it's my view that even if he had never started any trading, he'd still be worthy of a book. He lived a full life even before he changed Wall Street. I'll explain. He grew up in Brookline, Massachusetts, middle-class guy. Father was an executive in a shoe manufacturing factory. He always loved math. He had a passion for math. He kind of learned from his father to follow his passion because his father did it. His father had a thriving career in the motion picture business. Family obligations arose, and he felt compelled to go work for the family business, the factory business, and he wasn't happy. And Jim Simons noted that and said, you know what, I'm going to try to follow my passions. And they were mathematics. And he did well at MIT, got a PhD at Berkeley, began teaching. He taught. He was a popular teacher at Harvard and at MIT. But he always, as I suggested earlier, also had a passion for money along with mathematics. He got involved with this business. He helps start a business in South America. He needed money. He had some debts at that point, and he needed to find a way to make some more money. So he got an offer to go work for an organization called the IDA, which helps the NSA in the United States. And basically, it's not an arm of the government, but they help the government. He was code breaking. He was fighting the Russians, the USSR, in the Cold War.
1970s, right?
Exactly. I was about to say 1970s. Yeah. He was very successful as a code breaker. He learned how to build algorithms there. He also learned that he wasn't very good as a programmer. That lasted for a while. And he doesn't consider himself a very good programmer, but he knows how to hire them. But he also learned how to interact with some of the smartest people on the planet and how to recruit them to some extent, or he watched how they were recruited. And he subsequently went to Stony Brook University in the United States, in New York. It wasn't a really good school at the time, wasn't a good math department. He took it on to build it, and he did that. And again, he also honed those skills and recruiting skills. And in some ways, my book, The Man Who Solved the Market, obviously it's an investing book, but it's also a management book, I think, because you can learn from Simons as much there. He's got a remarkable ability to find talent, to recruit talent. Got a few tricks up his sleeve, getting people to leave their careers to join him. But he also is remarkable in how he gets people to work together. We could talk about that later. But basically, here he was in 1978. He had conquered all these different worlds, mathematics. Along the way, he got impressive awards. He was really the top of the field. He's one of the most important geometers of the past century. His work has really impacted all kinds of different areas in physics, others that you wouldn't have necessarily expected. Then he was, like I said, developed this department at Stony Brook. But he also got a little frustrated with mathematics, and he likes trading. So he didn't really do much of it. He had dabbled here and there with his wedding money and other kind of money, gave up on it. But something about it really spoke to him. He likes that thrill we get when you make a good pick and it goes up. He liked that. He really enjoyed it, even though the people around him were like, why are you wasting your time trading? Or he didn't even know he was trading. These were mathematicians who really didn't trade on their own. He set out, and currencies were becoming unshackled at the time. Prices were moving in currencies. And he said, you know what? I'm going to try to figure out and trade currencies. And he started in 1978. But it took many, many years for him to figure it out. So he really kind of gave up on his early career. He was an acclaimed mathematician and gave up a lot to try to make it in trading. And he found himself in this little strip mall in Long Island, spotty phone service, no one willing to work with him, unable to figure it out. And it took him a while.
So he started his firm officially trading the late 70s, and his first big year was not till the late 80s or first year, 1990. Lay that scenario out.
Yeah, so 1978, he started trading. He recruited Lenny Baum Welch. He's famous for that algorithm. If any of your listeners are aware, he's a pretty well-known mathematician in his own right. And again, Simons is really great at recruiting and bringing them on board, getting people to work with him, even if people have no interest, and these people didn't have any interest in trading. Lenny Baum, like many others who Jim Simons recruited, really had no interest in investing, which is kind of ironic because they're the ones who conquered the investing world. He started in 1978. They had a lot of ups and downs, and it wasn't clear what approach they should take. For early on, they tried modeling the market. It didn't really work. He brought on another mathematician named James Axe, who's also well known in his own right. Eventually, Simons and Lenny Baum shifted to sort of traditional macro kind of investing, where they would look at the news, try to anticipate the news, hire economists. They had this guy, not a well-known economist at the time, named Alan Greenspan, who they had consulted with. And they tried to trade like most others, and there were a lot of winning days and there were a lot of losing days. They made a lot, they lost a lot. The ups and downs really just left him sick to his stomach, literally, Jim Simons. And he said, I've got to find a different way. I got to find a better way. Got to find a way where the model works on its own and the system works on its own. And he believed there's some structure beneath the market that people aren't aware of, some way to pick up these patterns that were repeating. And he was convinced that he could be the one to do that. But again, like you said, it took years of back and forth.
That notion of structure, how close did you get as a guy who's been around interviewing, investigating, doing a lot of homework behind the scenes for a long time? How close did you get to really wrapping your arms around that structure, do you think?
I got a better sense for the fact that there's more order than we imagine in the markets. It's not as random. I became more convinced of that there are repeating patterns, and that's what these guys and some women do all day long. They find that, but there isn't any like one secret. I went into the project thinking, okay, Greg, I bet you at Wednesday at 11:48 each week, I don't know, commodity prices, these commodities always go up. It's not like that. Their system, they don't trade like most others. It's all about relationship. People, when I go on these shows and stuff, CNBC, whatever, what does he think about Google, Greg? No, they don't do that.
You knew I was not going to give that to you today, right?
Yeah,
Come on.
That I do, yes. That I knew. But the average person is kind of, they'll still do it. They'll ask him at these events, once in a blue moon when he'll do like a scientific event and they get some average person there. Or when you see even a quant, forget about Jim Simons, when you see a quant interviewed on TV.
David Harding comes on CNBC and they ask him what's going to happen next, that kind of thing.
Yeah, you roll your eyes. I'm not saying I came into it thinking there'd be anything like that, but I thought there'd be something a little bit closer to that. And that's not how they invest. What they do is they hold about 4,000 or 5,000 stocks long, about 4,000 or 5,000 stocks short. They make their money on the relationships among different individual stocks and other investments as well, meaning a group of stocks versus an index, a group of stocks versus a factor, a group of stocks versus a different group of stocks. It's almost an engineering and a technology achievement on their part, and they put together this sophisticated system to put all these different factors and other elements together into a system. What I came away with, and you asked me what I came away with, is just the understanding that there are many more factors, to use the terminology, affecting markets than you and I are aware of. we all focus on things like, I don't know, earnings, revenue, and then you get more sophisticated from there. It's my belief that there are many more, and there's some that just work for a little bit of the time, some of the day, etc. The Simons and his group are aware of more of them, but it's also important to remember that they don't get it right. Yeah, they're the greatest investment team ever. They're up 66% a year since 1988, but they're somewhat humble. I don't want to go overboard, but they're somewhat humble because they get it right barely more than 50% of the time. The point is that they're somewhat akin to a casino where they'll trade a lot. If you trade a lot and you get it right a bit more than 50% of the time, you make a lot of money. It's not like they are superhuman and they get every trade right.
I caught a clip the other day from my buddy Barry Ritholtz talking to Eugene Fama. On top of that, you just mentioned the random walk. How does a guy like Fama, you mentioned the random walk, and then on the other side of the equation, we have Jim Simons. What are us folks out in the audience supposed to take from that? Because Eugene Fama got a Nobel Prize for, I don't want to reduce his work to just saying it kind of says that a Jim Simons should not exist, but isn't that kind of what he says?
Yeah, I guess he would argue that Jim Simons is that monkey writing Shakespeare.
Hold on. Let me get to that performance chart again. How many billions did Simons make?
You put enough monkeys into a room, you will get one writing Shakespeare by definition. I agree with you. And if you talk to Simons about it.
Does he believe that too?
No, he does not. I've talked to him about it. He believes that there are inefficiencies in the market. There aren't many of them. I really don't want people to come away from the book saying, and some people have kind of suggested as much to me, well, maybe I can be like Jim Simons. I could build something like, no, do not try this at home. You could do a variation. You could try to do it on a small scale. You can be inspired by him. You can learn lots and lots of lessons, both individual investors and sophisticated ones. But to say that you could create something like this, he may be that monkey. And I don't mean it in a random way. I mean, there are
so much more brilliant, and such an interesting combination of assets and people that he's brought together with resources that the average person just is never going to have access to.
I think that's right. So people nowadays, now we're jumping around a little bit, but people on Wall Street, financial industry, they say, oh, I've got PhDs working for me. I've hired PhDs. What they do at Renaissance, they're not just PhDs. It's easy to forget or not to understand that these are the people, these are the tops of their fields. They could be at the tops of different departments, and they were at different scientific departments around the country. You take like a David Donahue from Stanford. These are just award-winning top PhDs. They're not just PhDs. They're people, again, in physics, in astronomy. They love to hire astronomers, the tops of their fields. They're not just hiring smart people. Everyone's smart out there. They're competing with smart people. These people have just done award-winning stuff, and he'll somehow get, and I can explain a little bit how, but he will recruit these people who have no interest in investing. They're award winners, and they see superstars in different fields. They'll target them. I don't think the David Hardings and the other competitors and the Cliff Astonses are able to attract this talent. Internally within Renaissance, they worry about talent and fighting for talent, but they worry about it versus a Google or a Facebook, not a Two Sigma.
As I look at this performance table still, and I see this consistency, you're describing to me an ongoing desire and ability to bring in top talent. But I see this consistency, 2000, 98%, 2001, 33%. That's not consistent return necessarily, but it's consistently positive. And you seem to be describing month by month that's consistently positive. My thought becomes, what are all the new people for? I mean, if Jim has discovered the structure, is it a structure that is changing in a way so much that all this brain power is required? Because I mean, this has been going on for a long time. This return stream is not new. So how much of this is core precepts that they put together with some of the original team? And is any potential new hires with the great pedigrees, is some of that to throw all of us off to think that all of that is needed?
Here's the answer. The original precepts are still very important, and I write about them in the book. There are principles that they've established. Some of it is breaking the day into bars that others kind of followed and copied afterwards or developed on their own, but still work for them. But It's a constant battle. It's hard to explain, but despite these returns, I know they look like they figured it out. They don't feel that way. The market is changing and they're aware of that. So I've talked to them about ETFs and the shift to passive. So a lot of what they do is they take advantage of the mistakes that we all make, that the average investor makes. I've said to them, what happens when there are no more dentists out there to take advantage of? There are fewer of them. As we all know, back in, 1999, you go to a barbecue, everyone's talking about pets.com and their shares going up, et cetera. You don't get that anymore. I don't know if people are going to talk about their investments as probably Bitcoin or something like that today. If the nature of the market is changing, and I think it is, active investors are shrinking and passives are rising. The behavior of the market seems to be changing. The behavior is also changing because of the man in the White House, the Twitter-based decisions. That's a constant battle for people internally.
But Jim's making money regardless of who's in the White House.
Yes, he hires these superstars and he says, go figure out how to keep up with this market, this ever-changing market. You wouldn't think it, but there's a real sense of urgency within the firm and pressure, and it doesn't feel like a university department. The talent is like a university department, but then when they get there, there's a feeling of a Wall Street firm and the pressure, and they work hard. It's a unique blend of the two. You're right. From the outside, we look at these returns, they're like they can phone it in from an island, and that's not how they feel. They feel it's a constant battle. They have to keep bringing in new talent. Like I said, they do have these outside funds, Reef and others that are available to institutions. They don't trade exactly like Medallion, but they are important to the firm too in terms of talent and hiring. And I talk about within the book, Jim was going through a personal challenge at the time. In some ways, I think he needed a distraction. That's why he started these funds. But now that they've gone, they wanted them to be successful. It's a weird thing. Like Jim Simons, the people within the firm are well established in academics and elsewhere. They join. They don't really need the money. They're not really out to get the money. Once they're there, I really do think they're hooked. And I write about it in the book. You don't want to let your colleagues down. There's some competition involved. You want to show that you're a star. You want to keep making the money once you get hooked to the money. For all those reasons, there is an urgency within the firm. And the markets, again, are always changing. They have to keep up.
Let me keep playing devil's advocate and pushing back. You start the book off really diving into, it's quite a challenge. I can really relate to where you had to go with this, but the secrecy element. I will let you just go down the path of kind of outlining some of the secrecy that you had to deal with, because this wasn't something where initially I don't think people were really saying, Greg, come on in and we're going to do a biography. Come on in. Everyone's going to talk to you. It wasn't like that. But when you're dealing with that much secrecy, is there a side of you, even though you're a cagey guy with lots of experience, is there a side of you where did you ever feel at a certain point in time and doing all your homework that people weren't being frank, or they were leading you the wrong direction, or there was disguises being thrown your way?
Yeah, you have to worry about that. It's a good point. These guys are cagey and they're secretive and they sign 30-page non-disclosures. Here they are talking to you. Why are they, you wonder? I was wary. That's why you have to check these things with others. But I do feel that good stories in life want to come out. People want to talk. They've just gone through this experience where they've worked at, or they currently work at, the greatest investing firm mankind or modern finance has seen. Kind of part of them wants to talk about it, wants to share this experience. They're going to go to their graves without sharing some of the insights or experiences and stories and drama within the firm. And part of it also is, and now we kind of get into sort of the strategy as a writer, they knew I wasn't going away. And I made that very, very clear.
They knew that you had enough, that you were going to go down a path, and that they were better off to make sure some of these things were accurate completely, at least, I'm guessing.
That's exactly right. I didn't say that overtly, but I over and over again left that impression that better that I write it than someone else. Someone was going to write the story, I said to them. Jim Simons' story, be it while he's alive or after he's gone, be it while you guys are alive or after you're gone, someone's going to write it. Better it be someone who cares about accuracy. And I do. I can't tell you how hard this project was. There were endless days where I was sending just short paragraphs that you wouldn't even notice as a reader, 4 paragraphs about mathematics back in the 70s and what Jim was working on, or something, some drama in the 80s at the firm. And I was sending it to people that are familiar with the information, and they'd say, and at first it frustrated me, irritated me. These are mostly mathematicians, and I'd send them 4 paragraphs. Greg, this is awful. Greg, how can you write this? This is terrible. You got it all wrong. And then I'm taken aback. I've been doing this for a couple decades. I didn't think I got it so wrong. And then we'd go through it. I don't know, 10% of it would be wrong. And that's kind of why I sent it to you guys, to go through it with me and tell me what's wrong. We all aren't thrilled with errors. They hate errors. Like this mathematicians, it's a whole different breed, I learned. Eventually, I stopped taking it personally. I kind of was amused. This is awful. This is terrible. What do you like? What didn't you like? Look at that second line in the 4th paragraph. You cannot describe differential equations that way. Okay, how would you describe it? And they would describe it. And I'm grateful. They spent a lot of time going back and forth with me. So I think, like the outsiders, the people on the inside and people that used to work there didn't want this to be inaccurate. They figured, all right, Zuckerman's not going away. Zuckerman's going to write this thing. Let's at least help. We're not going to give him the secret sauce, but let's make sure he's accurate about what he's writing. And then, frankly, yeah, they're poker players, but sometimes the secret sauce slips out. There were times when people told me things and they regretted it. You can't tell personally who said what, but there were those cases. I believe I got enough. The readers will tell me if I got enough.
It's a great feeling as a writer, though, isn't it? You're in the middle of something and then something slips out and all of a sudden all the pieces come together in your mind. You're like, yes, thank you.
Yeah, there were
a lot of that.
There were great moments in the process. There were awful moments. There were frustrating moments. There was a moment when Jim Simon's person says, Greg, Jim decided not to talk to you. I'm sorry. And that was it. I was like, how do I really write this book about Jim Simons if he's not going to talk to me? It's about his firm. It's not a biography. It's a lot of biographical stuff in there. It's really about how this group of colorful characters figured out the market. So there were awful moments. And as you suggest, at the beginning of the book, Nick Patterson, who played a really interesting, important role early in the firm, he said, Greg, no one is going to talk to you. And I remember sitting across from him in a restaurant in Cambridge, Massachusetts, saying to myself, how the heck am I going to write this book? He's right. Nick is right. They've got zero incentive. These guys got rich by working there. No one wants to piss off Jim Simons. So why will people talk to me, and what am I going to do? So there were a lot of ups and downs, a lot of drama behind the scenes, and hopefully it was worth it for the reader.
So I'm curious, how many hours did Jim give you? Is there anything you might like to share in terms of personality or manner or just something inspiring that he gives off that other people could take away as a distant lesson from a guy that's as accomplished as he is?
He spent over 10 hours with me in his office talking about not Renaissance per se, but his early life, his more recent years, which are interesting in their own right. We talked about mathematics, we talked about life, approaches, things like that. I have to say, I'm a cynical journalist. I look for flaws to some extent. He's got them, like we all do, but he's a pretty impressive individual. I really think he's one of the more remarkable just individuals, personalities of the past 100 years. Again, his accomplishments in mathematics and code breaking, recently in philanthropy. He's a good guy. He's very unique because he can do the math, needless to say, and he's a quant, but he's also, you could have a beer with him. He's a funny guy. Some of the humor I think comes through in the book. I hope it does.
You mentioned his math. Not you mentioned his math, obviously his math, but I was thinking of his father. You mentioned his background and did not lead with a father with a high math background or anything like that. But does Jim attribute his math ability? How does he view it? Does he view it as just purely hard work? How does he see himself? Because again, he's got math that us mere mortals, we're just not going to comprehend in our lifetime. So how does he see that he made his way through at least the topic of math?
I don't know if I have a good answer. He developed this early love for the subject, for the topic. He was encouraged by his parents to pursue it. They were bright people. They weren't math oriented, though. I don't know. It's a good question where his passion and his abilities came from, where they inherent. Did he work? Listen, I know he considers himself to be not the fastest mathematician. And he went to these top schools. He dealt with the top guys. There are people that are faster and quicker, he says. He's just very good. I'll talk about it a little bit in the book. He is really good at mulling a problem and sticking with it and being persistent. And you see that in the firm as well. There were ups and downs and they stuck with it. So he has an ability that maybe others don't. He chews on a problem for years sometimes in mathematics. That's one of his gifts and competitive advantages, I would argue. He comes at things also a little bit differently. He's got a different approach to mathematics than some in the field. And once again, that's similar in the world of investing too. I mean, it's ironic. There's a real paradox at the heart of my book that it was a guy in a group of people who didn't really know much about investing who conquered investing. And to some extent, I'm not saying he's an outsider when it comes to mathematics, but he does take different approaches to solving problems, and that's all helped him.
As we wind down, I got a couple more topics I want to run you through. If I take you back to the summer of 1998, for those that were alive enough to remember, it was a pretty crazy time. It was another one of these times where they said, if you don't trust the men behind the curtains, the government officials and the big banks, the world is about to go to hell in a handbasket because this hedge fund somewhere up in Connecticut basically blew up the world. And we're talking about long-term capital management. How did that affect you? Because that would have been a peer of his at the time. Probably much more money under management at the time would have been for LTCM, I'm guessing.
Yeah, LTCM was bigger, especially with the leverage. They were, I wouldn't call them quants, but they had a lot of similarities what Simons and Renaissance were doing because they hired academics and they hired often mathematicians, sometimes scientists. They hired from Wall Street, which is different from, in addition to the mathematics. So that was different from LTCM. Renaissance and Jim Simons don't hire individuals from Wall Street with any Wall Street backgrounds. But yeah, they were concerned. LTCM had models of their own and they didn't work. And so they learned lessons from that experience. One of them being, be humble, don't leverage up so much, don't be stubborn with your models. LTCM was a little bit stubborn. The Renaissance gang and Jim Simons in particular, they do not override their models 98% of the time, 99% of the time. And that's one of their skills. That's one of their explanations for their success. But once in a while they do. And it's usually Simons over the protests of his colleagues. And I write about it in the book, where in crises sometimes he will take risk off, even when the opportunities look great. So if you remember what happened with LTCM, because of what was happening in Russia, market was flipping out and LTCM stuck with its positions and moved into them a little bit more, added to them. And that's not what Renaissance does. Even when they see real great opportunity, they'll reduce risk in a period of crisis, and then they'll jump right back in when their models say to. They learned lessons from LTCM is were the answer, I would say.
I have one last question to you, but before I get to that, how would you define their strategy in terms that the average person comprehends? Is this a form of arbitrage? Is it a short-term momentum, kind of a cross-sectional momentum? Was there ever any real definition given to the strategies or the structure that they have determined and the way they go about it is just different than everyone else?
Early on, I think, until around 2000 maybe, a little bit before, maybe after, you could actually see them as cousins of technical traders, technical analysis.
Using price movement.
Exactly. All about price as an input. And that's what they focused on, looking at patterns, looking for patterns in the market. So that's not unlike what technical traders do. And I give that analogy and I talk about the history of technical analysis just a little bit in the book because I think it's important. That's how people within the firm describe themselves. Maybe you and I would be a little bit surprised by that because I think the general view of technical trading is that it's really unsophisticated and people dismiss those individuals. But there are some really impressive traders on the street, Stanley Druckenmiller and others, who use technical analysis sometimes to confirm a thesis. You got to look at them as a much, much, much more sophisticated version of technical trading. That was early on, or that was till 2000 or so. And then they started collecting other kinds of data, everything from the stuff that we call today alternative data. They are a data machine. They just know Bob Mercer, who played a huge and still plays a huge role within the firm, controversial politically, but he talks about there's no data like more data. So they vacuum up. If there's a piece of data you can think of a possibility, they bought it before everybody else, and they've been analyzing it before everybody else. Now you can look at them as early machine learning because their models work on their own. They don't even know really why their stuff is doing what it's doing, their trades, their signals. why they bought it, why they made money, that kind of thing. They can figure it out, and they do figure it out. But now you can look at them as sort of an early version of machine learning.
By the way, as you just mentioned, Bob Mercer, so you can talk a little bit about him, but I think it's interesting, this very prominent individual inside Renaissance basically helped to support Trump to get Trump elected. And Jim Simons was a big supporter of Hillary Clinton's. Such an interesting thing that inside the firm, you could have such a diametrically opposed political views inside the same shop, playing at the presidential politics level. It's amazing, huh?
There are all kinds of lessons, I think, from the Renaissance story. There's the investing, obviously, lessons, management lessons. There's also just lessons to how to work with each other. In this day and age, especially in the United States, when everybody's at each other's throats, you have Jim Simons, a left-leaning guy. I think he was the third largest financial supporter of Hillary Clinton in 2016, working with the co-CEO at the time, Bob Mercer, who may be the most important reason why Donald Trump's in the office, because Bob Mercer and his daughter Rebecca Mercer helped put Kellyanne Conway and, more importantly, Steve Bannon in the campaign. They settled it. They turned the tide for Donald Trump. Bob Mercer is a very right-wing guy. The firm is a mix. They got libertarians. They got all kinds of individuals. Now, what Bob Mercer was doing did eventually hurt morale within the firm, and I describe the scene where Simons had to come to Mercer and tell him he's got to step down as co-CEO. But they did work together for a long time, and despite the political disagreements, they're fascinating just characters within the firm and people who have worked there. That's the one thing that I was just overjoyed with, that they're not just kind of boring mathematicians. There's passion within the story, the Renaissance story. There's intrigue. There's all kinds of twists and turns that I hadn't expected.
My last one for you, Greg. Typically, this is the kind of question you would start an interview with, but what the heck was the trigger for you exactly? When was the trigger? What was D-Day that said, I'm going this direction?
2 decades ago. Who doesn't want to write about Jim Simons? I've been thinking about it in the back of my mind. I reached out to them at one point to work with him. This is years ago. I don't know, 10 years ago, maybe longer. Yeah, it's about 10 decade probably. And they were like, yeah, no, Greg, no, sorry. He's not working with you. He's not working with anybody. No. And we'll let you know if he ever decides to write a book. I've always kind of wanted to. And I remember being at a dinner and there was a quant guy there. And I was thinking to myself, I don't even think we were talking about quant stuff, but I remember looking at him and thinking, geez, that's the one story that hasn't been told on Wall Street. Wouldn't it be great if I could be the one to tell it? So then I started working on it. I got a book contract. I didn't cash the book contract. God knows I could have used the money.
When did you start the project with the publisher?
Late 2016, maybe early 2017. And then for 4 months, I'm sitting at my desk right now in my basement in New Jersey, and I had this check on my desk, and I wasn't going to cash it because I wanted the ability to give it back to the publisher. And I knew if I cashed it, I'd start spending it. I wasn't sure if I could do this project. And again, if I cashed it and then decided not to do it, it'd be a mess. I just didn't want it. And eventually the accounting department, Penguin Random House's accounting department, had this discrepancy. They wrote, what author doesn't cash in advance? It's not a lucrative business we're in. We could use the money. I got a kid in college. I was being stubborn. I wanted the ability to give it back. So I spent like 4 or 5 months working on the book without knowing if I could do it or not. And then I went out to California. I met with Elwyn Berlekamp and I met with Sandor Strauss. They worked with Jim early on at the firm. They were really fascinating individuals, but B, they were just interesting and colorful, and they had drama in their lives. And I said to myself, you know what? The early part of this firm, I think I can write about. It's just an interesting, fascinating group of people. They described other people Jim Axe, who had died. And I said to myself, okay, I think I can do the early part of this period, even if Simons doesn't talk to me. And then I'm going to make this giant leap. I really felt, and talked to my wife, I just still was never 100% sure I could do this thing, but I made a bet that I could fill in the gaps. I could do post 1990. Up to 1990, in his early life, I thought I could find enough academics, mathematicians, people who worked with him, even if Simons didn't talk to me. But thankfully, he did talk to me, and thankfully, I was able to get people within the firm. That was my fear. How the heck am I going to get people who actually work there right now to talk to me? But you try hard enough, and this was the hardest thing I ever did. And if you knew the hours I put into this thing and how much I'm getting paid per hour, yeah, it's not a pretty picture.
Well, now listen, not to toot my horn or anything like that, but I mean, back in the day, this is over 10 years ago, when I did this book on the turtles, on a smaller scale, I had these similar kinds of things where you're digging and you're digging and you're digging and there's no one talking to you. And then all of a sudden someone just says, oh, by the way, did you know this? Da, 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 da. And then you're like, oh my God, you got to be kidding me. And those kinds of feelings. So look, there's lots of people that have a podcast, but I do relate to so many things that you had to go through in this book. I think it's pretty damn awesome. Really, it's quite an achievement to go dig around in one of the perhaps the most secretive fund in the history of mankind, and to go dig around in there and to put a story together. Congratulations.
Thank you. I'm still stunned. I finished. Forget about whether people buy the book or not. And I hope they do. And I hope they enjoy it. And I hope they stay in touch and give me constructive criticism and things they like, things they didn't. I love interacting with readers and listeners. But yeah, I'm still a little bit surprised that I actually finished it.
The book, The Man Who Solved the Market, How Jim Simons Launched the Quant Revolution. Available everywhere. If they can't figure out where to get it, they don't deserve to buy it. Where can we send people? Is there a website or anything you want to direct them to reach out to you, give feedback, anything?
So I'm on Twitter. Feel free to reach out to me there. I think it's @GZuckerman. But I'm also at the Wall Street Journal. Feel free to email me privately, gregory.zuckerman@wsj.com. I love interacting with people. I get good story ideas, next book idea. Some of my best sources on Wall Street are people that ripped into me. You don't have to rip into me, people, but feel free to send me constructive criticism and things you liked and things you enjoyed in the book.
But please, after listening to this interview, do not write Greg an email and ask him how Jim Simons trades.
You can ask, but I'll send you to the book.
Good deal. Hey, Greg, thank you for coming on, and hopefully we can catch up for the next book, because a guy like you has always got another one coming.
That was a lot of fun.
And finally, Esther Wojcicki. I must admit, I was not familiar with my guest today before I was prepping for this conversation. Call me stupid, call me not so bright, call me out to lunch, call me that I've been living outside the States for too long. Either way, no excuse. I should have known about my guest well in advance of prepping for this conversation. She is Esther Wojcicki. And her book, How to Raise Successful People, Simple Lessons for Radical Results. You just got to love the word radical. When someone puts radical in the title, I pay attention. But I also pay attention to their backgrounds. Now, Esther teaches journalism at Palo Alto High School. Oh, you don't think that's impressive? Well, that's been her choice. Now, her husband is a quite acclaimed physicist. Her 3 daughters, which really form the inspiration of how she put this book together, her 3 daughters happen to be the CEO of YouTube, the CEO of 23andMe, and her other daughter is a top medical researcher. That is quite the accomplished list of children. Wow, that is one great job. So what we should all be asking, in an age of helicopter parents, in an age of kids kept inside some kind of padded clothing where they can't hurt themselves, what can Esther teach us? Well, the short answer is a lot. You want the long answer? Here you go. I hope you enjoy this conversation with Esther Wojcicki. So Esther, I'm thinking journalism. Wow, we could have a conversation today just on that topic. Tear it apart. I'm so curious as I read from afar your background and what you've accomplished at the school and teaching journalism for so long. And then I, as a guy who's way outside of America, looking in, observing the last 4 or 5 years in particular, I see this system where there just seems to be people on either side and they're on teams. And I start to wonder where the real journalism is. And I see people like, I see a few people, for example, and I don't know your view on this particular individual, but I see a few people like Glenn Greenwald living down in Brazil, who's generally from the left, but who's been taking on the left. And I see a few people out there that seem to be giving an authentic view without just being on their team. Why don't you speak to me about your views of journalism today and where we stand?
If you just think about what's happened in the last 20 years, what we have is a democratization of journalism. Anybody can be a journalist. They can set up a blog, they can set up a podcast, they respond. Just think of all the people that are writing tweets or people that are posting to Facebook. It's everywhere. And a lot of these people, not trained professionally either, have a lot of influence. One of the things that I've been trying to teach in the high school, and actually I think the high school level is the right place for it, is media literacy and media ethics for all kids. Because they're going to go out in the world and they're going to do something, I'm sure. I mean, they're doing it every day all the time. So maybe they're using Snapchat. They don't really like Facebook anymore, but they're using something and they're spreading their ideas through some app. They really need to know what good journalism is, and they need to have a sense of what good ethics are. And it's because, like I said, we have so many people out there doing it. And if you just take a look at YouTube, YouTube gets 1 billion education hits per day, not to mention the million new videos uploaded just for education. That doesn't include the kitty cats, which I'm sure you're familiar with. What about making sure that all kids everywhere have some sort of a standard, some ethics, so that they understand what is good journalism, what's a good source, how to actually source an article? That's where I'm coming from in the high school arena. I have at Palo Alto High School what is today the largest journalism program in the United States. So we have over 700 students taking journalism, and they are publishing either in a newspaper or magazines. We have a lot of different magazines, or they're publishing online. We have websites, television, podcasts. We're actually doing it all because we want to give them training for what is really the age of media. This is 21st century.
Let me dive into there a little bit more. All these young people that you're teaching that have a chance to come and learn at your program, but they also look at the nightly news and they can see, like all of us, that it's a pretty divided type place. At least that would be my position, that, okay, I can look at Fox News and they've got one perspective. I can look at CNN, they've got another perspective. How do you compete against that to give young people a perspective on ethics, a perspective on literacy, a perspective on being objective, when the highest reaches of media kind of look like they're defending their teams?
These kids are smarter than you think, really smart. I think all kids have sort of built-in little antenna, crap detectors is what I call them. What they are doing, at least in my classes, is they know what's going on the right and what's going on the left. And actually, they just wrote a huge 2-page spread on dealing with the culture of dishonesty here in America. I'd be happy to send you this article.
Yeah, I'd love to read it.
They really are tired of all this crazy fighting that's happening between the left and the right. They're tired of having to do these drills, lockdown drills. Are you aware that all the kids in the United States have to do that?
Is this for the potential shooters?
Yes. You're supposed to train all the students in case there's an active shooter on campus. I mean, it's really pretty awful.
I just had this conversation with my nephews in the States, and we were talking about what action do you have to take if that happens?
Oh, it's awful. You have to bolt the doors, and you have to pile furniture up against all the doors. Large numbers they show you how to do it. Then you never know whether this is a drill or whether this is real. So you're kind of terrified the whole time. Then you hide in corners and wherever you possibly can hide.
In some ways, you're saying to me that, like, okay, Mike, you're asking this question about how do the kids decipher media bias, but you're saying to me also, like, hold on, look at the other things that these kids are having to deal with that you never had to think about.
That's right.
Yeah, it's a different time.
It's a terrifying time. And kids are doing this too. Little kids, all kids, kindergarten through 12th grade. The left and the right, they need to realize what's happening here. This is the future generation. All this fighting, it's like being in a marriage, where the husband and wife are fighting all the time and you can't even think. That's one of the things that we need to stop this and stop attacking other people just because they have different views. Discussion, that's part of that philosophy of mine in the book, Trick. Trust, respect, independence, collaboration, and kindness doesn't exist now. We need to put that back into our lives and into the schools and into our politics. And it's not happening at all.
I'm sure you see this with a large group of students in person all the time. The in-person thing is really so key because once you get away to where it's only digital, then people have this different sense that they're not real people. But I find myself when I'm in the same room with somebody, even if we have different politics, generally we have much more in common than we would ever have not in common. But sometimes it's that digital divide where the people seem so distant and far away, and then everybody gets their gander up, so to speak. But when you're in the same room together, it's a different situation usually.
When you're face to face, it's a different situation. I think one of the things that's happening is, we're all playing these video games. Well, at least the kids are playing these video games. And if you look at most of those video games, they're somewhat violent. And you're like shooting this one and shooting that one, and you win when you shoot as many people as possible. I think that somehow hardens people, especially online, and it makes them forget that there's somebody human at the other end of that tweet or that other end of that posting that you've done or whatever, because there's a lot of nasty online bullying, and I wonder whether that would really happen in person. I somehow don't think so, because we're all here to try to make life in America better. Both the left and the right have the same goal. So can we work together on this? Media can help you do it, but right now media is fractured. And then also, as you mentioned earlier, it's easier to attack somebody that's online and just appears to be like some kind of a non-entity than it is, you would never do that in person because it's a human being.
Speaking of human beings, I think that's probably a great place to shift you because I could really pick your mind, and I might swing back a little bit to the journalism here a little bit later on. But I really want to talk about raising successful people because that's ultimately what we're talking about right now. We're already kind of drifting into that space. The title of your book, How to Raise Successful People. Let's talk about you because you've had a chance to have an interesting opportunity in your life. I think by any measure, outsiders, including me, who was not familiar with your story, outsiders would look at your background, your family, and say, wow, Esther has a pretty good case to be made that she has some experience in raising successful people. You must sometimes just say to yourself, wow, I mean, look, there's always a little bit of luck in things, but obviously you've had a process. You've had a certain way of doing things, and it's not worked just one time or two times. It's worked 3 times for you across 3 daughters. Why don't you tell me how you had the inspiration, the trigger to go down the path to start to write about your experiences and your family? How did that start to happen?
Well, it happened for 3 reasons. The first reason is that I had a lot of educators from around the world that were coming to see my classes, and they had a lot of questions like, what are you doing here? Why do you have so many students? And why do they all seem to be so successful? So a lot of observers, and they could come in anytime. I wasn't scheduling, special lessons for them to see. They were just seeing the class as it is. Second reason is I had a lot of parents asking me somewhat similar to the question you just posed. What did you do to those 3 girls of yours? How did that happen? And then the third reason that really put me over the edge, and I was like, I'm writing this book, was this epidemic of helicopter parents that have resulted in a whole generation of kids that are afraid to take a risk. So I thought all 3 reasons. It's like, I'm going to write a book and we'll see how it goes. That's the reason that I wrote it. We do have a major problem with the helicopter parents. Actually, what I call it safetyism. What we're trying to do through the whole child's life, starting at birth, is to make sure they are always safe, never unhappy. Always we prepare the road for the child. And by the way, that's an old saying that you don't want to prepare the road for the child. You want to prepare the child for the road. And we are not doing the latter. I've seen this happening in the schools. I've seen this happening with such nervous parents. I decided perhaps there's something I can do to help, because I did just the opposite with my daughters. And I do just the opposite in class. I give the kids many opportunities to fail and many opportunities to iterate. Basically, they write and publish, but those articles that they write, they take a lot of revision. Nobody writes it perfectly to start. And most kids are, whenever they get a paperback, they're afraid of, oh my God, look at all those red marks. I must have gotten a D. And most of the time, teachers put bad grades on the paper. But the way I teach, there are no grades on the paper until you get an A. So you have to keep revising until you get it right. And by the revision process, you learn. Boy, do you learn. Some kids have to revise 10 times, some kids 5 times, some kids 2 times. But by the time they've been in the program for 2.5 years, I can tell you that they do really well. And it's usually after just 2 or 3 revisions. And those are very sophisticated articles.
The idea of revising, as somebody who writes, revising does something in my brain that is just, I love the feeling of looking at something and saying, oh my gosh, there's a better way. Oh, wow, I didn't see that. Ooh, let me augment that. Let me strike that. Let me fix that. Oh, I love the feeling.
It is so great. The other thing is they worked collaboratively. That's part of my trick model. And what that does is it helps them help each other, not just in the writing process, but in the publishing, in laying out the pages, editing them, publicizing it. And this is a big program with about 10 publications. They all feel like they're part of a big journalism community where they're trying to get important ideas, important to them, to the world. They share it with their parents, you share it with the community members, and all their work is on a website. And the website is there for anybody to read anywhere in the world. So they're very, very passionate about it. And collaboration skill is a very important skill for all kids to develop. Well, actually all people to develop, but especially in today's world, kids need to develop those collaboration skills, because what employers are looking for, number one thing, creativity and collaboration. They want people that can do both. You can't have either one of those without practicing. You can't read a book on how to be creative and then be creative. Just like you can't read a book on how to collaborate and then all of a sudden collaborate. You have to do it to learn it.
Absolutely, that practice, that deliberate practice. No deliberate practice, it doesn't work.
Just like you can't learn to swim by watching someone swim. Otherwise, we would all be great Olympic swimmers because we all watch Olympic swimming.
Let me throw something out. So just a big picture overview before we start to dive into some of your content. So I noticed in your foreword, written by your daughters, they made some points about you as a parent and you as a person, how you behaved, how you act. And I just kind of jotted these down. They always had a feeling of independence. Their ideas and thoughts were not dismissed. You did not want people to procrastinate. You did not want your daughters, your family to procrastinate. No whining. You were always trying to break stereotypes, and you loved life and you laughed. I can kind of feel the love, life, and laugh right now. I think the one that really strikes me, and maybe it's my own personal experience, but I look back and I say, wow, if I was in a situation, and my family, they've done okay, and my father's a good guy and all that stuff. He's been quite successful. But I can't say that I grew up in a situation where the idea or the thought, just to put it out there, was often dismissed. And it was more just than a family thing. It was a structural thing. I grew up outside Washington, D.C., a lot of groupthink. But those are novel ways. They might sound simple to everyone listening. Oh, that seems, common sense. But common sense is often not so common. So why don't you take me back in time? Like, where did you start to put together the idea that you wanted to let go as a parent, to not be that helicopter parent? How did that start to unfold for you? Because you could have easily, I guess, have gone down another path. I mean, look, there's a wide-ranging story about your travel, your background, your husband, and all of these different things that made you in the book. But give me a flavor for some of the triggers that put you into this different thinking where so many people want to come learn from you today.
My number one goal for my daughters when they were born was I wanted them to be independent thinkers. So I wonder how many other parents, when their children are born, think that way. But the reason I did that, the story is in my book about the unfortunate tragedy involving my brother David, who was 18 months old at the time. And he was playing in the kitchen on the floor with a bottle of aspirin. That was prior to the time that Bayer put safety caps on their aspirin. And he opened it up and he ate a bunch. My mom, being an immigrant and afraid to question authority, she got these instructions from the doctor, who actually clearly hadn't listened to what she asked. He told her to put him to bed and wait to see how he is in a few hours. Well, she put him to bed, and of course, in 2 hours, he was violently ill. So we went to the county hospital where they pumped his stomach, but he was still violently ill. We went from hospital to hospital and then faced rejection because we didn't have proof of payment. And then by the fourth hospital, when they agreed to take him, it was too late and he died. So what that showed me as a child, of course, I didn't know this showed me to me. I wasn't like so smart that I could figure it out. But what it told me as a small child was that I was always going to question authority. I was going to make sure that I knew as much as possible, because it seemed to me that if I didn't, it was a life or death situation for me, because, you could make that mistake again and listen to somebody in authority who didn't really know what they were saying and didn't know what they were doing. That triggered in me as a mother. When my children were born, I wanted them to learn to be independent thinkers. That was the main thing. So I was teaching them a lot of street smarts. For example, one of the things was how to swim early. They learned how to swim really early at like 12 to 14 months. They could recognize letters, not because I wanted them to read, because I wanted them to know what street signs were. We always read street signs. I wanted to make sure that they never were in a situation where they would believe somebody and not question it. Isn't that crazy for a mother? But at work, it's really important for me. I just wanted them to be able to think. So I spent a lot of time talking to them like they were grown-ups, teaching them about like what kinds of foods you should eat and shouldn't eat. We read a lot of books. The main thing we did for entertainment back then was we went to the library every week and we took out a whole bunch of books and then brought back last week's books. That was just generally the routine. I had this theory early on that children learn the most in the first 5 years, and they learn patterns of behavior. I never read it anywhere. I never saw that any place, textbooks. It turns out is a good philosophy. I thought that 85% of a child's brain is developed by the time they're 5 years old. So I accidentally did that with all three of my daughters. By the way, that's what motivated me to continue that all along. Able to question authority, what they were doing, not be afraid of challenging the status quo. Because like I said earlier, I didn't really think as a child that I was going to, now I'm going to challenge the status quo. I didn't even know the word status quo meant. But it just was a way of approaching life, to be as informed as possible. Because if you weren't, then the alternatives weren't very positive.
As I listen to you describe the philosophy that you've developed, and if I just think about people that I know, friends, family, associates that I meet, if I had to in my mind say what percentage of the population, whatever population that might be, share the parenting style that you're thinking about, that you're describing, and use it, what do you think that number is?
It's low, I'm sorry to say. Because if they did believe in the way that, in my philosophy, they would not do everything for their child. Because when you do all these things for your child, you're basically saying to that child without verbalizing it, I can do it better and let me help you do it. And I'll protect you. You're going to go swimming? Here, don't worry, wear these floaties and I'll be there to take care of you. Or, if you can't today walk down the street by yourself. Children don't do that anymore because the parents, it's the safety thing again. They're so worried about safety that they don't let their children walk down the street. Just think about this. When you go to school today, it's nut-free school, nut-free classrooms. And it's because what percentage of kids are allergic to nuts? Maybe like 5%, 10%, but the whole school is nut-free because something might happen to, I don't know, 1 or 2 kids in there, and they can't trust the kid to protect himself in any way. And school is responsible. The teacher's responsible. Do you know how many EpiPens I have in my classroom? And I get all this training. Every year I'm required to have EpiPen training. So in case a student has a problem, these are high school kids. You would think that they would carry around their own EpiPen, but no, the school has to carry it around. That happens on field trips too. I used to take kids to New York City for a week, but now I have to take kids and their EpiPens with them, not to mention the fact that they can't be too far away from me in case they need it. I think the culture of safety has made us all more fearful. Then it's resulted in a generation of kids that are afraid to take a risk. And they're probably right because they haven't been prepared to take a risk.
I have to remind people, you are saying this from the perspective of a teacher who's at a popular high school with lots and lots and lots, hundreds of thousands of students over many decades. And you are giving this perspective. You're not just somebody who doesn't have a chance to see this on the ground firsthand every day. You are giving it to me straight because I don't have a chance to live this. So when I hear you say it, it's even more daunting to me. I'm like, oh my gosh, is it really this bad?
It really is, which is what I try to counterbalance in this program of mine. I have 7 other teachers. We have hundreds of kids. And what we try to teach these kids, believe in yourself. Get the information. How do you get information today? How do you evaluate the results of a search? Maybe it's not a good website. How do you know that? How do you know the information you got on an interview is credible? Check it, double check it, this kind of thing. And then work together as a team to put this information out for your peers. I mean, they do. What happens in the process of doing this is that they begin to believe in themselves. And by believing in themselves, they then develop this grit because, I can do it. I know because I've already done it in this area. I can do it over here too. Yes, I can learn this math because I've learned the process of I have to just do it a few times. Maybe I have to get a little extra help from Khan Academy online, or you never know what it is. But the feeling that you can do it is so important for kids. In most of the public schools today, they really don't get a lot of opportunities to iterate. And the public schools, the testing program is punitive. Of course, if the test counts for a lot, or if an essay counts for a lot, you bet those parents are in there doing it for the kid because they're like, I don't want my kid to fail. I don't want my kid to suffer. The system needs to allow for iteration, mastery. Mastery is really the best way to do it. Projects, working together, collaborate. Some kids will say, I don't really want to work with that kid. I only want to work with these kids. I always say to these kids, you go home and you talk to your mom and dad. And if you tell me that they love everybody that they work with, then that's fine. You don't have to work with them. I have not had a single kid come back and say that. They have to learn to get along with all different ethnicities, all different skin colors, all different ideas, and they do, and they're stronger for it.
Once a kid probably has a feeling for grit, has a feeling for their own independent achievement, that child's almost like a superhero because then you stop worrying about some things and you just know internally, I can do this. Oh, I can do it. I might fail, but I can do this. And if I fail, I'll start over. I'll try again. I'll do something else. But I've got like that superhero mentality now. I'm not fragile.
You're not fragile. You can do it. You can do it again. You don't have to be mean about it and, rebellious and obnoxious. You're just doing it again. If you just look at the scientists, since I'm married to this high energy particle physicist, they're always making mistakes, and then they're starting again from another perspective. Is like, well, maybe this isn't the right way, or maybe we should be doing it this way. They have all these hypotheses, and then they do the experiment to see if it works, and sometimes it doesn't, and sometimes it does. Scientific method works in many areas of life, and failure is part of learning. If you don't fail, you aren't learning. I don't know anybody that does it right the first time.
It's funny, right? When you said scientific method, I was looking at a piece of paper in front of me with the phrase scientific method. It was the next thing to come out of my mouth, and you said it. But, skepticism is so huge. And I love being a skeptic, not because I want to cause a problem or anything, because I trust but verify, right? I trust what you say, but are you okay with me verifying it? Because I'm a smart guy. I want to kind of see what's going on. I want to understand. I don't just want to trust. I want to know how things work.
We all have the right to know. I mean, that's actually one of the important things in medicine today. You need to be able to question some of the advice that you get from the doctor. Remember, 25, 30 years ago, the doctor was like a king. You could never ask questions. And they were making a lot of mistakes about those mistakes. But hopefully today, people do ask questions. I mean, you have that resource, Google, right? It's called. You can look up a lot of things online and hopefully find out something about yourself. And that was what the basis of my daughter Anne's company, 23andMe. She's like, no one cares more about you than you. Nobody cares more about your DNA than you do, and you want to know what it is so that you can protect yourself. So, for example, I had that DNA test early, of course. Mothers are always volunteers for things like this. And it turns out that I had a predisposition, and still have, to diabetes. And I'm thin, tall and thin. You would never guess. No one would ever guess. But it was incredibly helpful for me to know that I had this genetic predisposition, because then I just cut out all the sweets. And then all my problems were under control, because that is the number one problem, eating too much carbohydrate, too many sweets, drinking soda and all that stuff. Forget it. So now I'm a vegetable person.
I would be amiss if I did not take a sidebar, if I was not an explorer, to go down this particular sidebar. You just mentioned Google, and I think it's a very interesting word for your family. Is an important word for your family. I'm going to let you go where you want to go in a second, but I wanted to add something, my perspective, as somebody who put up a website in 1996. So in 1996, if you were putting up a website and you were thinking about search engines, you were thinking about Alta Vista and Excite and Lycos and InfoSeek and Yahoo. There was no Google. There was no Google at all. So what I think is really interesting, and of course, the success is off the charts. It's unimaginable. Your family's had a chance to be right there at a catbird seat and see things that you could probably talk about for hours, but you won't share with me because you can't share with me. But I find it amazing, though, because those guys had to sit there and say, hey, let's start a search engine in the face of 4 or 5 years of all these other people dominating the search space. And I still remember exactly how InfoSeek and Alta Vista worked, and they worked quite well. And then all of a sudden, everybody was gone, and there was one guy left standing, and he was like the 10th entrant in the game. And I think a lot of what you're talking about right here is what we're talking about, involving the grit to actually go about and launching a Google. In fact, if I'm not mistaken, the connection is really early on. Was there literally a launching or some usage of space inside your house?
So let me just tell you what this was. My daughter, Susan, she bought this beautiful house in Menlo Park, a little too big for her. It was 6 bedrooms, 3 bathrooms. And then she realized after the honeymoon, she had just gotten married, that she needed to do something to help with the payment every month, and it was like, oh my God, suddenly you're faced with this payment, which I think when you're getting married and you're excited about everything, you somehow forget. So what she did is she looked around to see if there wasn't somebody who wanted to rent her garage because that would help her make her payment. So you see, this was kind of a dark cloud. She didn't know how to make the payment on her house, but there was a silver lining. So parents need to remember there are silver linings in these dark clouds. And the silver lining was she rented that garage space to Larry and Sergey, and that's where Google was born, in her garage. She realized after watching them for a few months that what they were doing was better than anything else she had used out there. So she quit her full-time job at Intel and joined a startup that had no idea how they were going to make money. None. As a matter of fact, that was one of her jobs, to figure that out. You have to take a risk.
How closely at the time were you watching, or was she telling you what's going on? Or I know, look, as a mother, I'm sure you were kind of, there had to have been a side of you, even though we're talking now about giving the independence and taking the risks, there had to have been a side of you that was like, oh my gosh, she just got married. She just left Intel. She's got these two guys in her garage. Was there a side of you that was ever questioning?
I was like, oh my God, let's see. Hopefully we're going to be able to make the payments. But yes, I was there all the time. I was your typical helpful mother. I came over just to see what I could do to help. So of course I saw, there were like tons of computers. There were wires up and down the hallway. I mean, it was like chaos. Also, she didn't realize, I think, when she rented the garage that they were actually going to be there all the time. That's what happens. When you have grit, you're like, oh, it doesn't work. I'm going to stay here and fix it. So like at 3:00 in the morning, they were still there. And then at 7 in the morning, they were there. They were there all the time. They worked all the time. She realized, because she decided, well, they're in my garage, I might as well try this product and see what it's like. As you said, there were a lot of search engines at the time, right? Yahoo, InfoSeek, all these different ones. She used it and she realized these guys have something different. It was amazing. The stuff I couldn't find anywhere else. She took a big risk and she jumped off the Intel ship and decided she was going to be part of the startup world. I didn't really worry. My theory was always that after the age of 14, my influence was limited anyway. So I didn't even try. She was very lucky. It worked out really well. But she was also smart, because she also spent a lot of time figuring out how Google should make money. And clearly that worked.
The silver lining part is really critical, because I've seen this in my life. My life is not unlike Bayesian statistics. I just keep following along to whatever happens. So if a fork in the road comes, I take it. I just keep going along. And I like that strategy, but that strategy of adjusting to new information, that strategy of being accepting to new information, not unlike what your daughter did to join Google, that's very difficult for people, because, you get these best laid plans in your mind. You're 14 years old. I will become a doctor. I will do this. I will go to this particular school. I will get this particular grade. Sometimes I think the tunnel vision and the blinders block people off to something new that appears on the horizon. And that new that appears on the horizon could be absolutely amazing, but a lot of people never see it. And then later on in life, I didn't have an opportunity. But maybe you did. You just didn't have your eyes open.
That's right. You are afraid to take the opportunity. That's what happens. People can't be afraid to take these opportunities. Sometimes life hands you all kinds of difficult situations, but you have to turn lemons into lemonade. You also have to have a perspective that it's going to work out if you keep working at it and you believe in whatever it is you're doing. That's where the grit comes. And I saw that with my husband and all his experiments. I saw that with the founding of Google. I've seen that with the founding of a lot of other companies here in Silicon Valley. They have a vision, and it looks at least 51% of the time like a really good idea, and then they work at it, and it gets to be better and better. Your main goal is to do something that's somehow going to make the world better, or going to somehow help people do something that would be good for them. That's the best thing. You don't do something just because you're trying to make money, because you're going to lose out in that case. Because idea is a product or a service or a service. That was the goal of Larry and Sergey, by the way, to make the world's information searchable for everybody and findable. And that's what they've done. Back in the days when my children were small, I got that information at the library.
You mentioned, and I kind of didn't breeze by it, but I wanted to circle back to your acronym TRIC: trust, respect, independence, collaboration, and kindness. And for a moment, I would like to focus on kindness. We've talked a little bit about it, but that is one of those magical things, magical concepts, that if you can figure out how to do it, if you can incorporate it into your life, magic starts to happen. Like, if you're good to people, look, I'm in a Buddhist country right now. Karma is very important to Buddhists, and I think it's a great concept. It's kind of, basically do the right thing and it can come back to you. Do the wrong thing and it can come back to you. We don't necessarily know if there's any technical reason for that, but I think just basically as humans, it gets back to kindness. Do the right thing. And being kind to people really can open up amazing doors. But so many times, and I see this a lot, so many times people they don't get this kindness concept. And I worry when I come back to America and I spend time in America, I see the horse blinders and I see people being less kind to each other.
I don't understand why they don't get this, because I'll tell you, kindness is so important. A kind teacher makes you want to learn. A kind friend makes you want to be friends with somebody. Kindness makes you feel happy about the fact that you have somebody there for you in case there's something that's not going right. We all have difficult times in our life. If we can be kind to each other, it doesn't cost anything. So that's part of the reason why the subtitle of the book is Simple Lessons for Radical Results. Simple. These are really simple. Some people miss it. It's not rocket science. It's down-to-earth, simple stuff. And just smiling at people, saying hello to people, it makes a huge difference in the store, huge difference. Your valet parks your car. You can definitely say thank you and appreciate him, or somebody washes your car, or my housekeeper comes in, or somebody helps carry boxes of whatever that I've managed to put in the car. There's so many ways that we can be kind to each other. It just makes life better for the person who is kind and the person who's receiving the kindness. And it's so true in school, because kids do a lot of things that they shouldn't. I'm sure everybody knows what I'm talking about. Studies show that when you expel a child from school or you suspend them, that results in even worse activity on the part of that child. But if you treat them with kindness and understanding, and you can give them something like community service, or in my case, my students who had problems, they had to write an essay about whatever it was they did. I'm forever the journalist. And it worked really well because they reflected on what they did. And that reflection helps them understand someone else's perspective. So I think kindness goes a long way, and we are unfortunately not as aware of it as we should be. And I would like to remind everybody, important in life for everyone. Every religion says it, every single one, from the Middle East to the Far East to Africa, everywhere. Catholics, Jews, Muslims, Buddhists, everybody. Could we please remember what they say?
It's probably number one, really. Let me ask one kind of going out question. It's a big picture question just to get people thinking. And we've really talked about it over the course of this conversation. I think the thing that I see in your work, and you said it was when I asked you the percent, you said it's a low number. What's so interesting to me is to watch parents repeat their childhood instead of being skeptical. So you see one particular childhood and you say, well, I need to do something different. Let's do it different, which is kind of the way I look at it as well. But I see so many parents that that just repeat. Even if it wasn't a good experience, they kind of like latch on to the bad experience and run it over again. And like, I almost wonder if they would just step outside of their body, step out of their system and look down on themselves, and they could just see it's almost cartoonish to just keep repeating the same bad process.
They do that over and over. And it's because somehow we parent the way we were parented. We teach the way we were taught, even if we hate it. That's one of the things I say in the book. It has to be on the conscious level. You have consciously to tell yourself that you're going to be a different kind of parent than you experienced when you were a child. You want to improve it. Because if you look at a lot of these people who suffered all kinds of physical abuse or mental abuse in their childhood, they are fighting it as adults. So many people do things. I mean, if you go to the self-help section of the bookstore, it's like how to overcome your childhood. There's something called the Hoffman process that's out here in California. People spend $5,000 for a weekend trying to overcome their childhood. Then you have Tony Robbins, who does that. The number one message from Tony Robbins after you spent thousands of dollars to listen to him is believe in yourself. That's it. Believe in yourself, forgive yourself, love yourself. And these are all things that should have come to you in childhood. But because of our childhood rearing practices, maybe they didn't happen. So people, that's how they solve these problems, and it's hard. So you can be a really effective parent by teaching your kids, treating them with trust and respect, and giving them some independence, allowing them to collaborate with you on a variety of things that you're doing in life, and treat them with kindness. That acronym has all the different components in it. And the last 3 parts of it tell you how to implement the trust and respect by giving people independence and collaborating, collaborative parenting, instead of banning the phone and then wondering why your kid is so secretive and angry. Maybe you could collaborate with them and say, okay, there's so many hours in the day. You need to do your homework for this. You need to spend so much time playing a sport or so much time sleeping or whatever. How much time do you think should be spent on a phone? What are some of the rules that we should have at our dinners so that we actually talk to each other? So instead of just banning it or confiscating it, talk to them about it and then collaborate on a process of dealing with electronic devices. I think that's one of the number one things parents are dealing with today.
You're saying treat children like people because, your title of your book is not How to Raise Successful Children. Your title of your book is How to Raise Successful People. And that's on purpose, obviously.
That's right. It's on purpose. Your child is a person, and you are there to help nurture that person to grow into the best possible person they can be. Yes, treat your child like a person early on. Very important. Then they'll be open with you. And if you read that introduction my daughters write, they always knew I believed in them. If they made a mistake at school or at home or with a friend, I was always there to support them. And then, okay, that was a mistake. Maybe you should apologize. Let's see what we can do to fix it. But I never punished them because mistakes, as I said, they happen all the time. It's important for people in industry to also realize that because a lot of people make mistakes in the workplace and then they're afraid to tell people, to tell their employer about it. But you should talk about it, discuss it, and say how you're going to improve because everybody wants to do it right. They all want to. They're not trying to do something wrong. Nobody's bent to be, make mistakes all the time.
But what's interesting, as you say that, though, you're in a part of the world where the success from Silicon Valley has come from a mindset that says we don't know what's going to be the next home run. So we have to take a lot of swings. And we know in advance when we take these swings, there's going to be a lot of strikeouts. And we keep striking out because we know that if we play this game of swinging and swinging and swinging, we will then come into the home run that we could not predict. And that's a very difficult mindset for people to absorb. And I don't think most people even know that that's how Silicon Valley works or how venture capital works. I think they kind of bypass that understanding that there is a lot of failure to get to the success, to get to the next Google or whatever.
That is the atmosphere, the philosophy that permeates all of Silicon Valley. You described it really well. They're striking out all the time. And most of the rest of the world, you're right, they want 100%. They want it all to win. That's just not life.
That's not life. Esther, I appreciate you coming on today. The book, How to Raise Successful People, Simple Lessons for Radical Results. I don't know. I love that word radical. It probably says something about you that we've not even explored today to find out how much of a radical you really are. Hey, is there a website we can send people to? Would you like to, beyond Amazon and all that kind of fun stuff?
Well, I have two websites. One of them is raisesuccessfulpeople.com, and the other one is globalmoonshots.com. With Global Moonshots, I'm trying to implement moonshot projects for all kids. So worldwide. So within the school system, kids would have 20% of the time, or a creative moment, or curiosity time, whatever they want to call it, but 20% of the time to work on something that they think is going to make them and make the world a better place. But it can be anything connected with school or with home or with the environment or with nature or with food, anything, because there's so many opportunities out there for kids to work on things that they care about. And we don't let that happen in the schools. So that's what I'm trying to do with my Global Moonshots project.
I always tell authors, and I believe you're a first-time author, usually the second book just appears somehow or another. So hopefully in the future, if the second book does appear, hopefully we can have a chat. I really enjoy your perspective.
Oh, thank you so much. Yes, there's a second book coming.
Oh, I'm a good guess. That's such a good guess, right? Esther, thank you very much for your time today.
It's a pleasure. And thank you for including me. I really enjoyed this conversation. Thank you so much.
I see a time when those awake will understand how to make money in up, down, and surprise markets. Whether new trader or experienced, college student or financial advisor, protecting against a crash or just trying to make a lot of money, trend following offers everyone an answer in uncertain times. To get started immediately, send me an email, michael@covel.com. I will send you the right trend following steps to take along with my free video. But if you want to buy and hold, trust the government and trust Wall Street, this is absolutely not for you.